we can go live. If I could ask those in the gallery to not speak anymore. And if I could ask anyone who is speaking to speak into their microphone so it's heard on the YouTube link. Just before moving into the formal agenda, I just had a couple of things to say. I thought it was a perfect opportunity. The first is just a little update on the planning service, because I know there's a lot of public interest in that and a lot of member interest as well. So as most people will know, we're quite a long way behind on our planning applications. And this is not a problem that has sort of emerged overnight. Actually, 2 years ago, in May, when certainly when I started, this problem was in existence. We didn't have sufficient resources, and at that time, myself and the deputy chair offered whatever to support any resources that were needed. Unfortunately, that wasn't taken up. Later in the year, we identified the issues again, and it wasn't until September last year, with the appointment of Malcolm Johnson, that we were able to get both a proper planning review done and also to get additional resources put into the planning department to try and deal with the backlog, which was partly caused because we didn't have enough resources in that department, and then exacerbated by the COVID time. And during COVID, there was a massive increase in the number of applications. So it was a bit of a perfect storm, and that hasn't helped our planning department. Where we are today is that we have put on an outsourced company called Capita, and currently we have the equivalent of 4 full-time officers in the development management. We have 2 officers in the validation area, that is where applications come in to be checked, and we have allocated some 303 applications to those officers for the work to be done on them. That's equivalent to about 3 months worth of normal applications, which is quite significant. So in terms of where we're moving on existing applications, it is happening. It will take some time for that to move through, for those applications to come through to approval, but it has also taken the pressure off the existing officers who all have a caseload which is about twice their normal level, and allow them to move through that. I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect that we will be back to normal sometime, certainly within 6 months, and hopefully beforehand. It really depends on the applications that are in hand and ones that come in terms of their complexity. But I think it's important for everybody, and not just here, but in the public, for applicants, for agents, to understand that those resources are in place. It is having an impact, and it will correct itself in time, but these problems don't sort themselves out overnight. Second to that, we are in parallel, following the review of the planning department, putting in place, or we have put in place, a task force headed by Robin Venard, who many will know is the finance director and has headed up these sort of task force before, to start to put in place a whole change in processes so that we effectively reimagine our planning department, which is more outwardly focused, more less of a, I don't want to be critical, but less of a silo. So it views the whole of Rother as opposed to just the narrow statutory responsibilities. So that's where we're up to with that, and I hope that gives some summary background. It's not really a time for questions because I don't want to delay our meeting. There's a couple of other things that I'd just like to announce. This is the last meeting for our head of service, Tim Hickling, as he leaves us, I think, at the end of August. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank him for the legacy that is left at Rother, and to wish him well in the future. I'm sure that it will have many opportunities for him, and at the same time to congratulate Ben Hook, who's sitting over there, who has been promoted to the Director of Place and Climate Change, which also embraces the planning area, the intention being to bring together the needs of the authority and the district in terms of how we develop and how we integrate the needs of the corporate plan, really, as well as our local plan. So I just wanted to say those few words to start the meeting, and on that basis, we're going to commence. So, moving to the agenda, could I have authorization to sign the minutes of the meeting of July the 15th? Thank you very much. I'll pass those back. Thank you very much. We have some apologies, Julie.
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Curtis, Meir, Norton and Prochak. Councillor John Barnes is standing in as substitute for Councillor Curtis, and Councillor Thomas is standing in for substitute for Councillor Prochak.
Thank you very much. I don't believe we have any additional items, and I don't believe we have any withdrawn applications. Do we have any disclosures of interest? Point, yes, Councillor Errington.
Thank you. Just to say that I'm on the mailing list for the BOAG group, and I have been since 2019.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Harmer.
The same here, Chair.
Thank you. Any others? Councillor Thomas, thank you. Good. No others? If something should arise during the meeting, please just mention it at the beginning of the application. You see the planning application index, and that takes us to the first item, which is RR 2020/2260/P, which is Clavering Walk, and we do have speakers for this as well. So the procedure is for those in the audience that the officer will present the application, and then I will ask those who wish to speak against it to come forward to the seat where it says speakers and speak for 5 minutes. There will be the opportunity for members to ask questions, and then there will be those who wish to speak for the application, and then ward members and so forth, and we'll move on to the discussion and then ultimately a decision. I would just remind all those speaking to the committee, and in fact the committee asking questions, not to stray into areas that there isn't already information presented, and for the committee not to ask technical questions of those members of the public, because the technical issues should be directed at the officers. So if we could start. Sure. You need to.
Yeah. Morning, everyone. I'm just going to deal with the technical issues, hopefully first.
It's Jeff Pyra who will be presenting this.
Okay. So, thank you. This is a reserve matters application for 70 dwellings. I'm going to start by reminding you and talking through the outline permission. This is reserve matters pursuant to an outline planning permission for up to 85 dwellings, and therefore we have to ensure that the reserve matters accord with that outline. And also, I need to remind you that that outline permission also sets obligations and requirements on the applicant, which we need to be mindful when we're considering the application and any conditions we might want to impose. So condition 2 on that outline permission requires submission of reserve matters, and that's what we're considering today. Condition 4 advises that the application must be developed in accordance with the site plan, which I'm sure you all know, but this is the plan that identifies the site. And also with this junction access plan. The access is not a reserve matter, and these details were approved by the outline permission. Condition 6 on the reserve matters condition 6 on the outline permission requires the reserve matters to include full details of existing and finished ground levels and finished ridge heights of the proposed dwellings, and that has been done, and that just highlights, I suppose, the level of detail that we're looking at reserve matters. The ground levels are fixed through this permission, through the proposal. Condition 5 requires the reserve matters to be in broad accordance with, this parameters plan. So this parameters plan was discussed at the outline, at the inquiry into the outline application, and was approved at that stage. So what this shows is housing on the southern field and open space and suds for the northern field. It shows broadly a main street running east-west with housing to either side and some streets running north from that main street. So bear that in mind as we move forward. There's a series of pre-commencement conditions. So these are details that need to be submitted and approved prior to the developer being able to start on site. No work to be able to take place until those are approved. So just to run through those so you're aware, they relate to archaeology, construction, traffic management plan, construction environmental management plan, construction biodiversity management plan, an ecological design strategy, tree hedgerow protection plan, foul water drainage works details. Condition 17, the surface water drainage details need to be submitted and approved. They also need to be in accordance with the flood risk assessment that was submitted and approved by the outline permission. So it sets that context. The reserve matters need to be accompanied by hard and soft landscaping details, and they have been submitted, and we'll be going through those in a minute. There's also approved as part of the outline permission a unilateral undertaking, a section 106 legal agreement that places obligations on the developer. There's a number of obligations, but the one I just wanted to highlight was the obligations in relation to the sustainable urban drainage system. I'm sure we'll come into this in more detail later, but it requires the developer to submit details of the identity of the management company that will run, will be responsible for the management and maintenance of the SUDs, and that has to be approved by the council. It requires the submission and approval by the council of a maintenance and management specification in relation to that, and it also requires 6 monthly reports. Requirement to provide council a report on the condition of the SUDs every 6 months. So just to remind you really that those issues are all discussed at the Outline Planning Commission and have already been set in stone, and we are looking at this reserve matters within that context. So it's a narrow focus really in terms of the consideration for us as the local planning authority. So move on to the proposals. The reserve matters are the layout, the siting, scale, and the landscaping of the development. And this is an overview of that. So in the southern field, there are 70 dwellings proposed. I do mention this in the report, but I feel we had a good open pre-application process with the developer to talk about the design, and BOAG had some involvement in that as well. And you might recall that the developer also presented to you as a committee. It was online. It was obviously last year, and also they did an online consultation event as well prior to submitting the application. Through that process, it's my view and the design officer's view that they came with a scheme that worked well, responding to the context and providing a high quality of development. And I think the key features of that are a back-to-back relationship of gardens with the new development with the existing residents, which is down here. We pushed the developer to reduce the number of dwellings along that elevation. We felt there were too many, and we felt there needs to be wider gardens so that the gardens were wide rather than long in terms of the activity that might take place in those in relation to activity and the relationship with neighbouring properties, and that there were gaps within that street scene that you could see through across the development parcel. We also encouraged them to increase the width of that street and to add more trees, so it responded to the local context. I think they've done well, and I've got some perspectives to show you. And we also encouraged more streets running north-south to increase the ability of people to move through the site and to give views through to that open space. So you get some more close-knit dwellings in that top half and larger dwellings on the southern elevation. There's a lot going on in this drawing. I'm sorry if it's a bit small, but it highlights that all the trees around the site are kept, and this shows the root protection areas around those trees to show how that would take place. It does show proposal for an acoustic fence running all the way along the southern boundary, and I've got some further details of that. You've probably noted one of the conditions that I'm recommending requires the developer to come up with a liaison plan that we would need to approve in order to liaise with local residents and ensure that the exact alignment of that fence was something that worked for those residents, particularly because there's quite a range, as you have seen on site, of boundary treatments. There's sometimes quite a lot of vegetation, sometimes there isn't, sometimes there's mature trees that hang over the boundary as well. So it's important that that acoustic treatment is delivered without causing unnecessary damage to that existing vegetation. This is a 10-year layout, so the development proposes 30% affordable housing, which is the requirement of the outline permission. The affordable housing being the ones on yellow on this screen. You'll know that we have a policy that requires affordable housing to be provided in no more than small clusters of 5, which this does in various parts of the site. So there's always a mixture of tenures. I've got some street scenes here. So this is the main street. I think the development does a good job of responding to the local context. I would say it's sort of modern contextual design in terms of the materials, the roof forms, but there's no doubt they're modern dwellings. They are different in that sense to surrounding dwellings, but they do respond, I believe, in character and appearance terms. There's more views for you of that. This is one of those streets that is north-south, which we would sort of describe as a mews type street. It's slightly closer knit, slightly more hard standing. Provides more variety in range of dwelling sizes, and the dwelling sizes from 1 to 4 bedrooms here. More images. Variety across the development in terms of design and materials. We've got some perspectives here. So this is on the main street. We're particularly keen on properties having front boundaries. If you go to lots of new developments, you might notice often there isn't much boundary treatment at the front, and there's often this no man's land between where does the plot end and where does it what's the private space. So we think they've responded well to that in terms of how proposed hedges and pushing the dwellings back a little bit on the main street in terms of front gardens. That's a view from the open space to the north, looking back. Here again, proposed hedges. Further view there that shows some of the relationships of how that was expected to look. So the acoustic fence is proposed all the way along that boundary, 1.8 meters high. Exact specification to be approved, but it will be some sort of, as you hopefully can see here, some sort of double fence with some sort of acoustic treatment baffling to it. Okay, so I think moving on, I know the key issue, of course, is drainage, because we are in the hydrological catchment area of the Pevensey levels. Very important that we avoid impact on that, and of course our core strategy and our DASA policies expect that. They require such systems in order to do that. Policy DEN5 of the DASA requires at least 2 such treatments as part of that. This one proposes 5. The drainage strategy was set out at outline stage and convinced the inspector who approved this that the strategy would avoid impact on the levels. And of course, that's subject to the details as required by condition 17, and as well as the obligations in the unilateral undertaking that I briefly mentioned earlier. You'll have seen in terms of the advice from the local lead flood authority that more information was required in order to satisfy them that they could recommend that reserve matters could be approved in terms of drainage, but that in terms of condition 17, for which details have also been submitted, that some further details are required in order for that to be approved. that, to my mind, is not an unusual situation. What the reserve matters is doing is setting out spatially exactly how the development works. As I've explained, it sets out the levels, and it sets out it sets out the size and capacity of the drainage basins. It sets out the amount of impermeable areas on the site, so the amount of hard standing, and in order for the developer to do that, and their consultants, who we'll hear from later, they've done groundwater testing on site over a 12-month period, at least as required by the outline permission. And there's a number of assessments and strategies that you will have seen on the website that have been scrutinised by the local flood authority and seen by Natural England as well, in making their responses, which, as you will have seen, are both on no objection based on the proposals that have been submitted. Sorry. I think I'll leave any more discussion on talking about the drainage. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that, and I'm sure there'll be questions and comments from the members of the public and the developer, and I'm sure we'll get into that more. But, oh yeah, that's right. So, sorry. Having had the advice of the local flood authority that the reserve matters be approved, that the scheme will avoid flood risk off the site, we have undertaken an appropriate assessment, which the draft of which is before you. That has been submitted to Natural England for their advice, and they have advised that they agree with that, and that it is appropriate for the local planning authority to approve reserve matters under the habitat regs through that appropriate assessment. So as a reminder, I think one way to look at this is that the reserve matters is one piece in this jigsaw. There is still a series of conditions that need to be approved by this council, and there are further pieces in the jigsaw which all have to be secured and agreed prior to the developer being able to start on site. So this isn't the end of the story here, but this is the stage where we can confidently recommend that reserve matters are approved and enable the developer to move forward with final details in relation to the conditions. That's the recommendation.
Good. Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you. I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. We're going to have the first speaker against the application, which is Christine Forster from the Bow Group. Christine, do you want to take the seat at that table there? You need to press the button on the to get the microphone working. And you do have 5 minutes, and there will be an opportunity to ask you questions afterwards. I just ask you to keep tight. 5 minutes would be appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Christine Forster. I'm the Secretary of the BOAG Local Action Group, and I'm speaking on behalf of that group this morning. I will be followed by my colleague, Mr. Hugh Stebbing. This has been a controversial application which has elicited many hundreds of objections on a wide range of issues. Excuse me. Of significance, local residents remain unconvinced that the density of the proposed development is in line with Rother's own policies. We trust that in making your decision today, the committee assure themselves that the proposed development respects and does not detract from the character and appearance of the locality and is of a density appropriate to its context. Policy OSS4 refers. But in the remainder of our allocated time, we will focus on the core and critical issue. It is agreed that without appropriate mitigation, the application would have an adverse effect on the Pevensey Levels special area of conservation. The question before us today is whether the proposed mitigation is indeed appropriate and adequate. Before determining reserve matters, you are being asked to make an appropriate assessment under the habitat regulations. Paragraph 38 of the Grace Judgment in April 2017 says that it is only when it is sufficiently certain that a measure will make an effective contribution to avoiding harm that such a measure may be taken into consideration when the appropriate assessment is carried out. It goes on to say in paragraph 39, the assessment carried out under that provision may not have lacunae and must contain complete, precise and definitive findings and conclusions capable of removing all reasonable scientific doubt as to the effects of the proposed works. The reality is that you are being asked today to agree an AA which includes a significant number of lacunae or gaps, resulting in a requirement from consultees for conditions and mitigation measures. These have effectively been deferred to the later discharge of Condition 17. In addition, BOAG have engaged with experts in hydrogeology and civil engineering and have also highlighted gaps. Mr. Stebbing will take the committee through the detail of all unresolved and outstanding issues. BOAG are also extremely concerned that there is less certainty about the long-term protection of the levels from the Clavering development than is required for either the Ashridge or Spindlewood development sites. It is far from assured at this stage that the Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Board will adopt the SUDs, and in the event of a failure to do so, the future of the levels will ultimately rest in the hands of a resident-funded specialist management company. Given that the Clavering site is closer to the levels than Ashridge or Spindlewood, we believe that this represents a lack of consistency in decision-making and creates a perverse situation. The habitats regulation have precedent over all other planning considerations. It is our case that the appropriate assessment contains lacunae, is not complete and precise, and does not meet the stringent requirements of the habitat regulations. If this conclusion is reached by this committee, the application cannot be approved and reserved matters do not need to be considered. If the committee determines, however, that it requires more certainty that the measures proposed to mitigate the identified gaps will make an effective contribution to avoiding harm under Grace 2017, it could decide to defer a decision. We believe that the committee cannot be sufficiently certain where plans are not in place to demonstrate that they will make an effective contribution to avoiding harm. BOAG would be supportive of an approach which specifically requires the provision of more detailed information and plans in order to provide the level of certainty required. If, however, the committee determines that the appropriate assessment standard has been met, we request that stringent conditions and a further appropriate assessment are committed to in order to ensure the protection of the levels in perpetuity. We believe that there are critical issues which remain unsecured and for which further conditions are essential. Mr. Stebbing will provide the detail when he speaks. The habitats regulations continue to apply to the consideration of pre-commencement conditions, i.e. in this case, Condition 17, and the local authority remains the competent authority. A further AA to discharge Condition 17 will be required for this uniquely sensitive site, and we ask for your commitment today that this assessment and the discharge of all associated drainage conditions is made by this planning committee and is not delegated to officials. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Councillor Barnes?
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for your presentation. Could I just pick you up on the last point you made, which is that the council remains competent authority? I think that's what you said.
That's absolutely right.
Right. So at what point, we're looking 100 years down the line, at what point would the council have to face the music if everything else along the line failed?
So I think that relates. I think there are two sort of slightly separate things here. So the decision on the appropriate assessment sits with the competent authority, and that is this committee, or rather district council, effectively. I think the question you're referring to relates more to the who then undertakes the long-term management of the site in perpetuity. And as proposed at the moment, in fact, there is, and Mr. Stebbing will come onto this in his section, but there is actually no condition which specifically states that Pevensey and Cuckmere are the preferred option with a fallback situation. But what Mr. Pyra has referred to as the existing situation is that the unilateral understanding from the outline application says that a resident funded specialist management company will be the ultimate, if adoption fails, the ultimate people who are looking after and protecting the pregnancy levels. Now, what that means, if I may, Karen, is okay? What that means in practice is that there are some of the things that Mr. Parra referred to that are sort of protective factors around that, if you like, so that rather do have the opportunity to go in and inspect. They can give 28 days notice if they find a failure of the maintenance or a failure of the systems. And then they can undertake remedial works at their own cost, creating a charge and a debt to the residents. But that would be a debt that Rother would have to collect. And ultimately, under the unilateral agreement at a resident funded management company, effectively the step in is Rother District Council.
Right, we can cover that off the page a bit more. Do you have any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, sorry, we did have one. My apologies.
Sorry, it's just a general question, and I don't know whether it's Christine or Jeff that's got to answer it. So we've talked about a unilateral undertaking. We've talked about appropriate assessments. We talked about conditions. It's just understanding where they sit. And
I would rather they were directed at the officer during the discussion, because they understand the real technicality behind that. I apologise. Do we have any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. If we have Mr. Stebbing, please, to swap seats with Ms. Forster. You've been here before, so you know the routine.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Hugh Stebbing. I'm a retired chartered surveyor and a member of BOAG. You are being asked today to agree an appropriate assessment, which includes a significant number of gaps, resulting in a requirement for further conditions and mitigation measures, which have effectively been deferred to the later discharge of Condition 17 under the current officer plans. The Pevensey and Cookmere Water Level Management Board, Pevensey and Cookmere, have been unable to recommend the discharge of Condition 17, the critical outline planning approval drainage condition, because of the following outstanding issues. Confirmation is required that the proposed mitigation measures will be adequate for the lifetime of the development, that not enough detail has been provided on the proposed swale, which will connect to the coal stream, that information provided did not appear to assess the potential for overland surface water flows from the site to number 39 Clavering Walk to the southwest, requiring drainage proposals to mitigate this offside flood risk. No such plans are yet in place. Plots 52 to 60, about 10% of the total, require alternative surface water drainage proposals for which there is no designed, assessed or approved drainage plan. DASA says under DEN 5 that drainage should be by SUDS. The current suggestion is for private drainage for these plots. That would not be SUDS, it would be contrary to DEN 5. But there are no plans or offers of proposals for those particular properties currently on the table. Natural England have advised that vital mitigation measures should be attached to any planning permission by planning condition or obligation. 4 of these relate to the SUDS design, but the 5th, crucially, requires that all elements of the SUDS treatment train are to be managed and maintained in perpetuity by Pevensey and Cookmere, or this specialist management company that is frequently referred to, with an appropriate planning condition or obligation attached. They also require further consultation if a specialist management company is to be used instead of Pevensey. Now, none of these 5 measures are secured through the existing unilateral undertaking. And in addition, we at BOAG have highlighted a specific concern in relation to plots 60 to 70 on the southern side of the site, where it appears that the land will be raised, creating the potential for overland surface water flows towards and into the Clavering Walk properties. which when combined with the on-site flood risks that I've referred to for plots 52 to 60 represent uncertainty in relation to 25% of the total plots. Failure to evidence that the contributing catchment of the SUD's open basins have been included in the impermeable area is another concern of ours, together with a lack of evidence indicating that long-term storage proposals will restrict outflow to a rate not exceeding 2 litres per second per hectare for all predicted storm events, as opposed to historic rainfall events. These issues are not reflected in the appropriate assessment, which has gaps. Now, we acknowledge the inclusion of a proposed condition 2, but we assert that there are issues which remain unsecured, and there must be additional stringent conditions and a further appropriate assessment in order to ensure the protection of the Pevensey levels in perpetuity. So we ask that condition 17 includes a requirement for evidence to assure the calculations of the impermeable area and evidence to confirm that the long-term storage proposals will restrict outflow in all future storm events. We assert that Natural England mitigation measures 1 to 4 are attached as conditions, and that this planning committee attaches a condition which secures the future of the long-term management and maintenance of the Pevensey levels, not point in a unilateral undertaking. We ask that this condition requires that the SUDS is adopted by Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Level Management Board or a named and suitable public water body. Our view is that the substantive gaps in the current information before this committee would give grounds for an outright refusal because the appropriate assessment, in our view, is inadequate. If the committee is not of this view, then we submit that a decision to defer would be the correct response, allowing for the important further information to be brought forward and given appropriate consideration before any refusal or approval decision is taken by you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do we have some questions from Mr. Sterling? Yes, Councillor Palmer.
Chair, you may say that this is technical and it has to be directed at Jeff, but I think it's only fair that one question out of the two we had, as a resident's perspective, it's a short question, if that's all right. Mr. Stebbing, can you tell me why is a condition required when unilateral undertaking is in place?
Well, thank you. The unilateral undertaking is indeed what it says. It's a legal obligation on the part of the developer to present certain information, but that information is presented to officers. That is done, if I may use the term, behind closed doors, whereas a planning condition would present an opportunity for an open, transparent, and public assessment of the decision that has been taken relative to that condition.
Thank you, Mrs. Stebbing.
Any more questions? Yes, Councillor Barnes.
It's probably one which I also need to address to the relevant officer, but I know that both at Spindlewood and here, you have given considerable attention to the habitats regulations. If in fact the Pevensey levels are damaged, who is held responsible for that breach and what action is likely?
Thank you. The answer is in 2 steps. The first step would be the owner of the site. At the moment, the owner of the site is or is likely to be Bellway Homes. So in the immediate development stage, they would be the responsible owner of the site. The polluter pays. They would be the cause of any pollution and they would therefore pay. Once the development is complete, one can expect that Bellway Homes will cease to be the owner. They will move A, on to other development sites, and B, will have sold to a variety of homeowners who collectively will then become the owner. The owner will have, i.e. the residents themselves, including those in the affordable homes, will have a responsibility for then the ongoing maintenance and management. And should that fail, the responsibility will default to this local authority. So the ultimate buck will stop with this local authority. Bellway homes will be there for whatever short duration of development there might be, whatever long duration of development there might be. The owners will have their interests, but are clearly not professionals in terms of the maintenance and management of such schemes or in the removal of harm to protected areas. So there has to be a question as to whether and how they will, over time and in perpetuity, remember, maintain those obligations to the level that would be expected and required to avoid harm in perpetuity to the levels. And if all of that fails, it will be the local authority who will be the ultimate holder of the buck.
Thank you. No further questions. Thank you very much. Very much appreciate hearing from you. And could we have Julian Goodban, who's speaking for the application? Julian, can I confirm you're a director of Bellway, is that right?
That's correct.
Oh, thank you very much. Just so everyone understands your position. You have 5 minutes, please.
Morning, I'm Julian Goodban, Regional Planning Director of Bellway Homes. Joined here today by Conor Lydon, Director of Tetra Tech, and Ed Family, Principal Engineer at Art. Conor and Ed are members of our team who have designed the drainage system for both development today to answer any
Oh,
questions.
excuse me. Could you push your speaker? That's all right. Yeah.
There we are. Would you like me to start again, Chair? Or would you?
Go on. Yes. For the sake of the people watching. Yeah.
Apologies. Good morning, I'm Julian Goodban. I'm the Regional Planning Director at Bellway Homes. I'm joined here today by Conor Lydon, Director at Tetra Tech, and Ed Family, Principal Engineer at Ardent. Conor and Ed are members of our team who have designed the drainage system for the proposed development and are here today to answer any questions you may have. Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address the committee this morning in support of our application. We have been involved with the site since 2017, and following the grant of outline planning permission and appeal in early 2020, we have been working on the detailed proposals. This period has included ongoing engagement with the local water management board, urban design officers, and local community group BOAG. This process and ongoing discussion with consultees and residents has helped shape the planning application before you today. The outline planning permission established the principle of development on the site. In allowing the appeal, the inspector gave the following reasons. Highway impacts were considered acceptable. The site was deemed to be in a sustainable location for housing. The impact of the site would not harm the amenities of local residents, and the proposed development would not have any significant adverse effects on the Pevensey levels. The outline permission is for 85 homes. Yet through ongoing discussions with officers, we have reduced the scheme to 70 new homes. This lower density of development enables a more spacious layout with landscaping and significant open space across the site. The layout addresses all technical matters which have been discussed with officers to date. The result is a proposal that positively responds to the character of the surrounding area. In accordance with the requirements of the Outline Planning Permission, we have undertaken a lot of detailed studies of the site and worked closely with the Water Management Board in designing the drainage network for the development. Importantly, they have no objection, and given the level of detail we have provided, they have also confirmed in principle that they will adopt the system for its long-term management. This too is our preference. But should this not happen, then a specialist management company would be appointed, with this being the subject of approval by your council. The application also follows the principles set out in the Outline Planning Permission, which includes a series of drainage treatment stages to manage surface water in such a way that would ensure that Pevensey levels are safeguarded. Natural England, importantly, have no objection on this basis. As such, All relevant statutory consultees have no objection in terms of drainage design and the safeguarding of the Pevensey levels. In response to the comments raised by BOAG, the density is appropriate. Density has been reduced, as mentioned, from 80 to 70 dwellings, and the principles of good design you've already heard from the officer today. In terms of the appropriate assessment, that has been undertaken robustly and thoroughly examined and accepted by Natural England, as stated in paragraph 6.1 of your report. This states that your appropriate assessment concludes that your authority is able to ascertain that the proposal will not result in adverse effect on the integrity of any of the sites in question. Having considered the assessment and the measures proposed to mitigate for all identified adverse effects that potentially could occur as a result of the proposal, Natural England advises that we concur with the assessment of this conclusion. Lastly, I'd like to highlight the benefits of the scheme. The scheme is design-led in terms of landscape and built form. The construction of 70 high-quality homes ranging from 1 to 5 bedrooms, including 21 affordable homes, delivers much-needed housing. 3.6 hectares of open space is proposed in the northern field, with play areas, wildflower grassland, scrub and swales. We propose to plant 326 new trees across the site, an acoustic fence to preserve amenity, pedestrian and cycle-friendly layout, and the installation of electric vehicle charging points. We therefore respectfully request that the application be approved in accordance with your officer's recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goodman. Do we have some questions? Yes, Councillor Langlands.
Yes, I do have a question. Well, I've got a few related to climate change.
You have your microphone on.
Can you hear me? Everybody okay? In relation to climate change, because I obviously, as you realise, that we've had a major report come out that's code red for humanity, and I'm sort of thinking, well, in 2019, the UK Parliament declared a climate emergency, and I would imagine as a rather large developer, you've been thinking about that and how you can reach this sort of 2050 goal. So I imagine you've been thinking about materials and things that you want on site. Now, I looked at your design access addendum, but I can't see things that are inspiring me that this development isn't going to put a whole load of carbon on Rother that have actually got their climate emergency to net zero in 2030. So we really have to think about this, I think, with new developments, and I am concerned. So quick yes, no answers, just so that I don't take up too much time. Will you be using ground source heat pumps?
At this stage, if we were to develop it tomorrow, no.
Right. Is there any underfloor heating?
No.
Are there hydrogen-ready boilers?
No.
Bearing in mind that gas will be forbidden in 2025. Are there solar panels?
Stage, no.
Are there triple glazed windows with tinted glass? Electric charging points. Wonderful to hear that this morning. Will they be with every property?
Yes.
Brilliant. Lovely. Will the road... Carry on.
There's a slight caveat to that, which is that where each parking space adjoining a house, a dwelling, will have an electrical charging. I am confident that with the exception of maybe 4 plots, then every plot, every house will have an electric vehicle charging point.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that detail. That's good. My last one is, will the road be made of reclaimed materials?
We need to develop our roads to adoptable standards. I don't think that is a requirement
Right.
It's
East Sussex
just,
County
have you
Council.
thought about it in terms of how you develop your sites and improve your own personal commitment and responsibility to climate change? Has that been a consideration?
We can only design to East Sussex County Council standards, and that isn't one of their standards.
I just feel that the onus is on you, really, as huge developers, to think about these things and perhaps make a stand and bring these things forward. Because what I'm seeing as arriving in at the end of Clarion Walk is a massive load of carbon. People buying properties that are very, very shortly.
Language. Is there a question?
But, you know, well, I'm just thinking that I would like to think that you had more consideration about the materials that you used and the way you design.
I think the starting position, as I'm sure you're aware, is in determining any application is the local plan and any national planning policy guidance and any other statutory requirements. And of course, we're fully in accordance with that. You're mentioning how well could we maybe go one better? Well, we are embracing climate change. It is a key consideration for Bellway Homes, and as we go forward, and on the reasons for that, that's why we are beyond policy requirements, offering electric vehicle charging points. We tend to operate a fabric-first solution to our developments and our houses. So what that means is that we invest the money into the external envelope of the building, because that then is safeguarded in the future. Our business's view on add-ons, what I would call add-ons, such as photovoltaic cells, have a lifetime in terms of their ability. They need to be maintained, they need to be looked after, and as a result, we invest in the fabric of the building to make sure that provides the right energy efficiency. But you'd be interested, I would have thought, to know that on average our buildings are 10% better than the legal requirement in terms of building regs, and that will be the case with this site. And we're also planting a significant number of trees. We're planting over 300 trees. We are creating significant biodiversity net gains in terms of the area that it remains undeveloped, and that will be safeguarded in perpetuity. So I think it's slightly disingenuous to say that we're not necessarily embracing that. We are embracing that. We're taking that forward as part of this scheme and all of the other schemes across the country.
Okay. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say firstly that I'm very aware that as a developer you have been responsive both to the planning authority and also to the local residents in terms of design. Now, I noticed you said just now that ecology was a key consideration for you and you were prepared to go beyond policy requirements, bearing in mind that the Secretary General of the United Nations has said there is no time to delay and no room for excuses. If you had the time, if you were given more time to consider the design of these buildings, would you be prepared as an organisation to take on board the very important environmental considerations raised by Councillor Langham? In other words, would it help you to actually design better buildings more in line with your own environmental principles if you were given the time to do that?
I think what you're asking me is, the question in my mind is what you're saying is, could you, if you didn't develop this site now and you developed it in the future, would you do it differently? Well, that's trying to predict the future, but I think the issue what we're trying to address here and now is the need for additional housing within the country, and that's within the southeast England, that's within Rother. There is a significant housing crisis. The proposal is to provide 70 new homes, 21 of which are affordable, and we are going above and beyond all environmental regulations that we are required to be and bound by today.
If I could interject, actually, Councillor Thomas, last year there was a consultation carried out with members, all members that came along, and I think, whilst I appreciate all the points being made, that was the opportunity to ask for all sorts of things and have those discussions rather than the committee meeting minutes.
Is Chair with
One
a
question.
question. Because you can't go right ahead, you can't start building because there's a whole raft of considerations that have to be addressed first. You can't just start building immediately. So given that you can't start building immediately, why would it not be a good idea to use that time to look again at the design of these buildings, bearing in mind the kind of things that Councillor Langland has talked about are not rocket science, they're matters to which the building industry is already familiar.
I'm not sure if that's a question or a statement.
If you have the time.
If you had the time.
Would you use that time to reconsider?
My response is the same, which is that we're responding to a number of issues. We're responding to the delivery of much needed housing, and we're responding to that. We can only design, and we can only provide, and we can only build in accordance with today's regulations and standards, which we are doing.
Okay, I think can I just sort of cut that question off? I think it's a little unfair because there has been a lot of consultation on it. What we're deciding on today is the application in front of us, not what might be. Yeah, I think that's the point that has to be taken up. I'm going to move to Councillor Gray.
Langland's has already asked all my questions for
good.
me.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'll move to Councillor John Barnes on that basis. Yes.
After those rather more profound questions, which I think it's slightly unfair to ask a representative of a developer who is not presumably a member of the board. I've got one which is will sound rather more trivial, but it is not without interest. I'm slightly unclear to what extent your buildings will trench on the historic area, and I wondered why you took the decision not to dig trenches prior to the development, saying very firmly that you don't think there will be any substantial remains. What evidence have you for that?
Thank you. So, good question. As part of the application at the outline stage, we did a what's known as a desktop review. So that looks at historic mapping, that looks at historic evidence within the area, and professionals come to a conclusion on the basis of what we know, the evidence before us. If we, at the second stage to that, and prior to any development, and I don't have the condition in front of me, we will need to submit a archaeological assessment. So we've done the work, and we've concluded, and as a part of that, it's confirmed that there are no archaeological remains as part of within the site. So it's one of those sort of catch-22s, really. You don't want to. There's fairly significant works that need to be undertaken, and you don't want to do. If you dig up the site, doesn't get planning permission, then you're affecting the biodiversity of the nature of the field, etc. So it's a bit of a catch-22. You look at all of the evidence before you to understand what's likely to be there, and then that's sufficient to be able to attach a planning condition, which is in this case.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Drayson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small point. How confident are you, because of our previous experience with some developers, that there will actually be 21? In the detail, you've already looked at this site. Are we likely to see you come back and tell us they're unviable at a later date?
The Section 106 requires us to provide 21 affordable units or properties. That's baked into our legal obligation. Coming back with any alternative proposal would require an amendment to that legal obligation, and evidence would have to be provided. Where we are currently, assuming that we would start on site as soon as possible, we have absolutely no intention to come. I think what we're referring to here is a viability argument, to come with a viability argument to reduce the level of affordable housing. We are committed to providing that number and that level of affordable housing.
Thank you. I realise that's the best you can do now. Thank you very much.
I have one question for you to finish off before you finish speaking. There's clearly a lot of concern about the management of the SUD system in the future, and there's been discussion by the residents and by the members. And I'm wondering if you have the authority at this meeting to commit to giving the Pevensey and Cookmere board first option, should they wish to take that option up, of the management of that on no different terms than you would give any other management company.
Thank you, Chair. I think, as Mr. Pyra pointed out, the unilateral undertaking requires the approval of the management company by your council, and it requires the management and specification be agreed by your council. In terms of the adoption, the process with the water board, we've sought to engage with them and to understand whether they would adopt the drainage system, and they've confirmed, and this is the issue, or this is the stage we're at, in principle, that they would adopt it. I can give that same commitment from here now. In principle, we would be perfectly happy. We would fully endorse and support the drainage, the SUD systems to be adopted by the water board.
Okay, that's not quite the question though. The question I said was, would you give them the first option should they be able to take it up on no different terms than you would give any other management company?
I think I can easily answer that. Yes.
Good. All right. That's a very simple answer. That's
Chair,
all you need to say.
I think it's in everybody's interest in this case that this happens. Unfortunately, we're unable to commit to that today because of we don't have that level of detail for the drainage board to be able to.
That's why I'm asking you to give them the first option on the same terms.
That would not be a problem, and it's something that we fully support.
All right. Thank you very much. And I don't think we have any further questions for you, so thank you very much. You've taken a fair grilling there, I'm afraid. Could we have Connor Lydon, please, from Tetra Tech?
Morning.
Good morning.
So Connor Lydon, Tetra Tech. As Julian mentioned, I'm a director at Tetra Tech. I am a chartered hydrogeologist. I have a degree in earth sciences. I have a master's in hydrogeology. My professional experience has been focused purely on groundwater related matters over the last 18 years. And I've been involved with this scheme since or prior to the outline application appeal. I've been responsible for a lot of the data collection on the site, principally the groundwater related information. So we started with ground investigation work at the site in December 2019. And during that time, there have been hydrogeological assessments prepared, draft reports in 2020, reports that were then updated in February 2021 to take account of the 12 months monitoring that we completed. And we also provided a summary hydrogeological or summary groundwater note in May of this year. All of that information was used to help our geotechnical engineers to carry out uplift calculations. Those are requirements as part of the outline application. We needed to assess the risk of groundwater uplifting and causing a failure of the SUD system. So the groundwater information is important to then inform those uplift calculations. In addition to the uplift calculations, we carried out seepage calculations. So these calculations looked at shallower groundwater within the clay-rich strata on the site and the effects that those might have on open excavations. We presented all of that information as well in both technical reports and in summary documentation over the last number of months. There was a number of comments in respect of climate change, so I thought it might be useful if I could just address what we have done from a groundwater assessment and from a geotechnical uplift calculation perspective in the context of climate change. So we've used worst case water levels throughout all of the assessment to help inform the SUDS design, which Ed can talk about. We have also, as part of that uplift calculation that's been carried out, there has been an additional 10% added to water levels. So we've taken the maximum, we've added 10% to that again, in line with Eurocode 7, and we've also reduced the level of counteracting material that would sit on top of groundwater as part of those calculations also. So there's 2 additional layers of protection there in terms of the factor of safety, and then there's been further ballast included within the design of the SUD system as well, and that's over and above the factor of safeties that have been calculated and presented. All of the calculations demonstrate that we meet the Eurocode standards, and we've exceeded that. Happy to answer more questions. I'm mindful that Ed also needs to contribute. And
thank you. Are there questions for Conor? Yes, Councillor Hahn.
Just a thought. I've tried to get very technical. Well, I haven't tried. We have had to get very technical with all these things. And I very much respect your qualifications and what you've had to say and all the work that you've contributed so far. But anyone that watches a telly nowadays knows what's going on in the world as a human being. And have you, I'm sure you have, considered you're using a set of figures and calculations to build your system? Are you at all concerned that your figures could be way out, because there is strong evidence that tells us that the water levels that sit below could be a lot more due to future predictions on rainfall? As a human, we all watch the telly and see what's going on with fires and flooding. This situation could be a heck of a lot worse than all of us know.
Thank you for your question, and obviously very pertinent at the moment with reports issued this week as well in terms of climate change predictions. So it's widely accepted that in the wetter months we will likely experience heavier rainfall events, and in the summers we'll likely have drier events. The British Geological Survey in late 2019 did complete a review of expected rainfall patterns in the UK and the effect that climate change will have on groundwater levels nationally. I did have a direct quote really from their conclusions, and essentially they concluded that the pattern of change is very complex spatially, and that there's no clear pattern of change shared by all of the scenarios that they modelled. I suppose they are a well-respected authority in terms of predicting what changes we might see in groundwater. It's difficult to pick a number and say, well, we need to apply 10%, 20% or more to account for climate change. But what we've tried to do is use the worst case scenario levels that we have observed over a 12-month period. We've added additional layers of conservatism then through those calculations that I mentioned, through the reduction in counteracting weight, and also assuming another 10% as well in terms of those high water levels to try and account for potential future scenarios.
Thank you, but you're obviously working within constraints of what's legal right now. But I understand your answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barnes. John Barnes.
Yes, I think I'd like to understand a little more about what you mean by worst case. In my mind, it's not simply a matter of the changing pattern. We are one of the driest parts of the country. Indeed, we're drier than North Africa at the moment. That is likely to change. But what is also happening is we're getting rather more of the kind of unexpected, extremely heavy downpours of the type that, for example, my village led to flooding in 2000. We're getting them more frequently. And I'm wondering how much you have built in to your worst case, not simply a shift in the overall pattern, but the unexpected event, the 1 in 30 year event, because I think they're likely to be more prevalent.
Yes, without shouldering that question, I know Ed is probably leaning forward because I can speak to what additional factors we've accounted for in terms of groundwater, but in terms of taking account of climate change within the design of the SUD system, that was obviously Well, Ardent were responsible for that aspect, so Ed can probably speak a little more about that particular aspect if that helps.
Well, we'll wait till Ed comes forward.
Unless your question is
yeah,
groundwater.
Do you mind waiting for the next speaker to answer that question? Yeah, Councillor Thomas. Yeah.
A lot of attention is put upon the risk of flooding. I'm interested in another issue, and I'll be interested in your comment. I'm interested in the whole business of contaminant, because obviously building itself produces a considerable range of contaminants. I noticed that one of the answers to that is there'll be the subsystems, because that won't apply when you're actually building the subsystem. There are these contaminants, and I'm particularly interested in the modern contaminant, namely microplastics. I wonder if you can say something about that. And I'm also interested in knowing whether there's any research which says these are the kind of levels of contaminants we can expect, and these are the kind of levels which we regard as safe. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I must be honest, it's not an area I specialize in terms of microplastics. I have a broad awareness given the nature of the work that I do. Really what we're talking about here is surface water drainage. We're not talking about effluent or foul water that comes from properties.
Yeah, Councillor Thomas, I don't think that's a question for the speaker. That's not his area of expertise.
No, he just said he had a general qualification. I didn't know whether he had expertise in this or not.
That's right.
But it's an issue which does need to be raised.
We can talk about that
when
we talk. This is not an area that you have expertise.
It's not an area I have expertise in.
Was there anyone else who wanted to speak? Yes, Councillor Errington.
Hi, thank you, Connor. You said that you'd carried out the groundwater monitoring. I'm just looking at condition 17 of the outline planning, which says that it must include December to November. So that would be December 2020 to November 2021. Is groundwater monitoring still going on, or have you completed a 12-month period outside of those dates?
So just in respect to the periods that you gave, 12 months, we started monitoring in December 2019.
Yeah.
So we carried out the ground investigation in December 2019, and it was immediately following that investigation that we deployed electronic water level monitoring equipment. So the monitoring period ran up until December 2020.
Okay, thank you.
And it was following that then we completed our reports or finalised reports in February 2021.
Thank you. And another quick question, which I've been asked to ask, is the impermeable area. When you're doing the calculation, does it include, as I understand it, the roads and the car parking, etc.? Does it include the suds themselves?
So again, Ardent will have taken account of the hard standing area when coming up with the sizing and design of the sud system. So I think Ed will likely be able to answer that question for you.
No further questions. All right, thank you very much, Mr. Lydon. And we'll just have Mr. Family come forward.
Hello everyone, I'm Ed from Ardent Consulting Engineers. I'm a civil engineer. To answer your question, we designed the surface water network to accommodate the 1 in 100 year storm event, plus an allowance of 40% for climate change. So this demonstrates that the surface water network will be able to accommodate future storms and very heavy rainfall. In regards to the impermeable area of the SUDS, there is sufficient capacity within the surface water network to accommodate the catchment area of the SUDS. The SUDS have been designed with 300 mil of freeboard. The freeboard is additional storage that is not being utilised. The freeboard is approximately 55% of the storage provided within the SUDS. As part of our work, we carry out sensitivity checks, and the impermeable catchment for the SUDS is attenuated within the freeboard, and this demonstrates that there is sufficient additional capacity within the network and to allow for the catchment of the SUDS, and it has minimal impact on the network.
Did anyone, you'd just like to take questions if there are any questions, yeah? Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Family? Yeah.
Can I just quote you from a report by the Royal Society? It said this about snails, if you just give me a moment. It said that snails exposed to microplastics show significantly decreased vigilance and anti-predator response compared to those not are exposed to microplastics. Have you taken account of the way in which microplastics get into runoff consists of very, very small particles that suds systems are not particularly good at dealing with, and therefore the Ramshorn snail is likely to be exposed to microplastics, which the evidence suggests has an adverse effect upon them.
As part of the design, we take into account water quality, and the SUDs have been designed in line with the national standards and Syria guidance. The most important factor to good pollutant removal is the size of the permanent pool of water in relation to the catchment. We have demonstrated the permanent pool of water is of a significant size to remove pollutant material and sediments. Therefore, the SUDS features are in line with national and local guidance and good practice. The majority of settlement takes place in the first 6 hours. We have demonstrated the SUDS features allow for sufficient time for settlement and pollutant removal for all storm events. We are providing 5 stages of treatment. Context, Spindlewood Drive, a nearby site. The planning approval has 3 stages, therefore we're providing additional stages of treatment at the site. In terms of the microplastics, I don't specialise specifically in that, so I can't comment on microplastics, but we've designed a system that allows for pollutant removal.
Yes, Councillor Lang.
Hello, Ed.
Hello.
Just one question. I'm right in thinking, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it now works by gravity. Your SUDs now work by gravity. Did I understand before that you had them above ground with a pumping station? That was your original plan, and why did that change? Just as a point of interest for me.
It's just part of design and development. I've been working closely with Tetra Tech, and they were able to advise that we're able to lower the invert level of the basins after they provided further calculations. So we were able to remove the surface water pumping station, which is, well, yeah, we didn't want to provide the surface water pumping station because a gravity solution is preferred. But through design and development, we're able to design this out.
So the gravity, hopefully, if it gets to the point where it's travelling too fast through the ground, you have a system whereby you will release it into the coal stream at a slower rate.
So downstream of the SUDS features, we have a hydro brake, which restricts the flow of surface water into the coal stream, and we've mimicked the kind of existing greenfield runoff rates that will be discharging into the coal stream, and that's why we've got the SUDS features which attenuate the surface water flows.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Mary Barnes.
I think obviously you'll have heard what Mr. Stebbing had to say about the drainage. And can you just assure us that all the houses on the plan will be covered by a competent drainage plan? I was somewhat alarmed to hear him picking up bits. I think he talked about houses 60 to 70.
Yes.
Can you just explain that everybody will have the same consistent treatment for drainage of the site?
That's correct.
And drainage which will be 100% 100-year proof.
Yes. So we've allowed for the whole development to drain to the SUDS features. The lead local flood authority were asking for further detail of the private drainage that connects into the adoptable drainage around a certain area of the site. It wasn't specifically that the area wasn't draining to the SUDS. The whole area of the site drains to the SUDS features, so we'll be going through 5 stages of treatment.
Oh, I don't quite understand that. Can you just...
He said that everything would be going into the SUD system.
Yeah.
It will... I'm sorry.
That's all right. You can ask again. Go on.
Oh, sorry. How totally will that be covered in perpetuity? I mean, going through the system is one thing. Going through it systematically is another.
So the impermeable area from the development will drain into the adoptable system, which will then drain into the SUDS features. So all the impermeable area is going through 5 stages of treatment. So I can basically state that the water will be treated before it's discharged into the coal stream.
Councillor Harmer.
I'm not sure if this is what you meant, Councillor Barnes, but on we were discussing the different levels on the development, and certain properties have been pointed out where they are at different levels. You've got certain runoff, which could affect current residents' houses, and also current resident houses could affect it if that level's different. And I have read somewhere, I think, that those people are required to sort their own drainage system out for that particular reason for runoff. Would that be correct? For 10% of the houses, is that right?
Yeah, I think he gets the question.
Yes, as part of the strategy to avoid removing material from the site, we've adopted a sustainable approach, so raised houses in certain areas of the site, and those plots will still connect into the adoptable drainage. The lead local food authority were asking for further detail on the private drainage, which is the around the house drainage, in particular to that section of the site. That section of the site will connect into the system. They're just asking for further detail on surface water drainage around that area.
Condition 17 relating to all that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Were there any further questions? Excuse me. Excuse me. You can't do that. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Thank you very much. Very much. Was there no other question? No? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Very much appreciated that. So we're just going to move on to the debate, and the two ward members, Councillor Errington and Harmer. So I'm going to start off with whichever would like to speak first. Is that Councillor Harmer?
Thank you, Chair. This is the first time that the Plan Committee has been asked to consider and make a decision on what has been a controversial planning application. It's initially refused by Rother via a decision notice at the outline stage, and subsequently approved on appeal. Local residents informed an action group, BOAC, who took it on as an appeal as a Rule 6 party. BOAC objected to the proposals under the habitats regulations, but this reason for refusal was not supported by the council. The reality of what's happened since that time has confirmed to local residents that their original objections and fears were fully founded. This is now the third iteration of the proposed drainage system, and many issues and gaps in evidence still remain. They require conditions and mitigation to be secured. We have a much better understanding of the habitat regulations and the precedents this has over all other planning matters. This is our opportunity to take local residents' remaining concerns very seriously and ensure that the right conclusion is reached for this protected habitat at this detailed reserve matter stage. The Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Level Management Board have removed their objection, but they do not recommend the discharge of the key drainage conditions, condition 17. Natural England have now removed their objection, but they do require further consultation if the Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Level Management Board do not adopt the subsystem. This seems to suggest that although consultees have withdrawn their objections, the extra information they require clearly shows that they continue to have reservations. It is positive that Pevensey and Cuckmere Water Level Management Board have agreed in principle to adopt the SUDS, but we should remember that this is not a foregone conclusion. There is still a long process of agreeing the detail of the structures, obtaining ministerial consent and the board members' approval, and perhaps more importantly, agreeing a financial settlement. If the SUDS are not ultimately adopted by the PCWLMB, management will revert to a resident-funded specialist management company. The residents pay for their own maintenance on top of other costs. There is a unilateral undertaking in place to secure management by such a specialist management company, with opportunities for Rother to intervene in the case of failure, if identified. The council have the right to enter onto the site to inspect the conditions of the SUDS, and having given 28 days notice, can undertake remedial works. charging the residents with the expense, which I think we've already discussed, which will be due to the council ultimately. This is not the position for either Ashridge Court or Spindlewood sites, and we must ask ourselves if it is right to have a different standard of protection for the Clavering Walk site, which for those of us that went on the site visit on Tuesday and we climbed over the stile, the house on the left, basically in their back garden, that's where the levels are. It's a different thing from when we went to Ashridge Court and we had lots of boxes ticked. This is right next door, and as you're all aware, it wasn't on the original data. So it is absolutely vitally important that us in this room today get this right. Around Ashridge and Spindlewood, conditions are in place to secure the long-term future of the levels. Such a condition has not been recommended by officers for Clavering, which is proposed by local residents in their comments of August 1st, 2021. If the committee does reach the conclusion that the requirements of the habitat regulations have been met and an appropriate assessment can be passed, as a ward councillor, I would fully support the attachment of additional conditions to secure the protection of the Pevensey levels in perpetuity, and in particular, a condition which requires the long-term management of the subsystem by PCWLMB or a named public water body. And I think it's worth pointing out, Mr. Chairman, that we have got challenges in our Rother district, as in all the country get these huge targets and figures with 300 houses have to be built nationally. And in our area, roughly about 90% is AONB or SSI sites. And we've got a nearly impossible task. Unfortunately, the targets, most of those houses are built in our ward. And so you can understand the level of dissatisfaction from my residents. This is the last little bit, and it's right next to the levels. This is what the residents have been fighting for. And I would just like to end by saying a big thank you to the residents that have committed a lot of finance, a lot of their time and commitment on behalf of the residents of St Mark Ward. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes, thank you, and I apologise if some of the points have already been covered because I didn't expect such a long debate, or did I? There's been considerable public interest in this application from the outline application made back in 2018, with over 1,300 objections at that stage and more than 300 objections at this reserved matters stage. The site, as Councillor Harmer has pointed out, lies directly adjacent to the protected Pevensey levels. It's one of 3 sites which this committee will have considered, which are in close proximity to the levels, with the Clavering site again being the closest. I made the decision to bring this to committee to ensure that we're fully considering the consistency of our decisions and that the risk associated with any decision which does not afford the same level of protection to the Pevensey levels from the Clavering site. I've also been thinking that if we get something wrong in terms of a splay, or a road, we can change it quite quickly if there's a problem. We can't change anything. If we get a problem, the levels will be impacted. It would appear from the advice from the Pevensey and Cookmere Water Levels Management Board and Natural England that although they've moved to a position of no objection, there are some key issues which remain outstanding and which require mitigation measures or the attachment of additional conditions, and I don't know if that's possible to do. Some of these appear to be significant, including confirming that the proposed mitigation measures will be adequate for the lifetime of the development. We've spoken about 100 years or more. We must assure ourselves that whatever the decision of the committee today, the future of the protection of the levels is secured through robust mitigation measures and stringent conditions. Either what's there at the moment is sufficient, or maybe we need to consider more. Although Pevensey and Cookmere have said that the additional information is satisfactory and assures us that the proposed development layout can be drained without increasing flood risk on or off-site, I recognise the concerns of our residents in relation to the flood risk to the existing properties. That would be the beaches, number 39, Clavering Walk. Local residents have also concerned that this is true for a number of existing properties adjacent to the southern boundary from the site. That's plots 60 to 70. I believe we need to able to reach a point where we can assure existing residents, many of whom have already experienced flooding in their gardens and ponding, that they will not be exposed to any additional risk of flooding. I also want to talk briefly about the appropriate assessment. We've been asked today to pass an appropriate assessment. I hope you've all seen the copy. I note that it makes no reference to the private drainage requirements for plots 52 to 60, or indeed whether or not National England will deem acceptable any proposals that are made. And again, I think we've mentioned that plots 50 to 60 are over 10% of the site. And ideally, I would have liked to have seen some more detail about that at this stage, but we are here now. Whilst there are no objections from consultees as the competent authority, we must assure ourselves that there are no gaps in the assessment and there were avoidance or mitigation measures are in place, we are assured that they will be effective. I'm personally concerned that although we're being asked to approve the appropriate assessment today, a further appropriate assessment will be required when condition 17 is discharged. I would therefore like to see this final and possibly amended assessment returned to the committee along with any other additions, if that's possible. Mike?
Yes, I'm just going to ask Jeff Park to respond to some of the things that have been said because it may help the discussion.
Thank you. So, yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is that there are concerns, obviously, from BOAG and around the table in relation to whether the safeguards are in place to ensure that the impact on the levels is avoided. And my advice to you is that they are. I can go through that in a bit more detail. That's what condition 17 is for. And the fact when the consultees are saying they want to be reconsulted, that they're not. That's not a concern. That doesn't mean they've got reservations. It actually highlights the safeguards that are in place and the processes that still have to go and be gone through in terms of the detail upon the detail of these reserved matters in relation to the drainage issue. So that is the safeguard. That's the comfort you have. I think BOAG and myself, and I'm sure we around the table, are aligned in what we want to achieve in terms of making sure those safeguards are in place and everything is properly scrutinised, and that will take place. And that's absolutely right that the habitat regulations continue to apply to all decisions that we as the competent authority make up to this development being built. So, as there will be a submission further details of condition 17 that needs to be approved, that will require appropriate assessment. Because appropriate assessment is there to consider whether the decision that you're making avoids impact on the levels. So today we're considering whether we can approve those reserved matters, and the appropriate assessment considers whether we can agree those reserved matters without impact on the levels. So it's not about updating, or using the same appropriate assessment when we get to the condition 17. It's a new appropriate assessment considering that issue and ensuring that additional information avoids impact on the level. So that, as I say, this is one piece in the jigsaw. It's not the end of the road, and we're continuing down that process. Yes, but despite me saying that condition 17 is that condition and provides that safeguard, what we can add as conditions are issues that come out of these reserved matters details. I mean, you've been talking about some of those today, which were picked up by BOAG and picked up by the local lead flood authority in terms of change in levels caused by the scheme in relation to properties adjoining the existing properties. So I've added a condition that specifically requires details for those. So it's clarifying what is required as part of condition 17 in relation to this reserved matters scheme. So it specifically in condition 2 requires the details, which will be provided anyway, I'm sure, but it helps to clarify that in relation to plots 52 to 60. And I've said here, overland surface water flows from the application site to neighbouring properties. And I would suggest that we add in plots 60 to 70 on that, so it's completely clear. That seems a sensible thing to do. There might be confusion over the word private drainage. That doesn't mean it's something outside and separate from the drainage. You know, as I'm sure you're aware, within your own house plot, you're responsible for your drainage. It doesn't become the responsibility of the water company until it's outside of your property. That's why they're calling it private. But as it was confirmed today, the drainage for those plots is directly connected to the surface water drainage system for the whole site, the SUDS system. So it's all part of that system, and that's all part of the consideration that condition 17 will take a final view on. Management by the Water Level Management Board, also adoption by the Water Level Management Board. I think we all feel that would be the best option, and Bellway have confirmed that's the option they want as well. Safeguard for us on that is that under the unilateral undertaking, which is a legal obligation that is enforceable, we, the council, have to approve the identity of the water company. So if it's, we're expecting it to be that. If it's something else, then we have the ability to consider that and test that, and whether we feel that is appropriate to approve it, along with the management and maintenance schedule. And we would be consulting the local flood authority, Natural England, as part of that process. And it's useful to see that Natural England are highlighting that they want to be consulted, but we would be doing that anyway. So all those safeguards are in place. But my advice is that it isn't reasonable or acceptable to add a condition requiring it to be adopted by that board, because that was an issue that's already been considered by the outline permission, by the inspector who determined that outline permission. And what they've determined in terms of conditions and legal obligations is other facts. They're not something for us to consider today. They are what will happen. Yeah, you've suggested that the condition details should come back to committee. As you know, that isn't normal practice. Officers have delegated powers to consider condition details, which I certainly feel we do very well and scrutinise properly. And as part of that process, the consultees are consulted. But it is within your power, in my belief, understanding, for you to request that to come to committee. And I can understand why you may want to do that, given we can hear around the table the importance of this issue and this issue on other sites as well. So I presume you'd have to vote on that as part of your recommendation, but I think that's within your gift to do. As I say, an appropriate assessment would need to be required on those details, so that we as a competent authority are confident that making that decision continue to avoid impact on levels.
Good. Yes, Councillor Harmer first, yeah.
I just need to ask these three questions to clear my mind. One I'll read out, please, Jeff. From the appropriate assessment during the construction phase, will it be the site manager who will regularly inspect the surface water management to monitor performance, both from the quality and quantity perspective? There doesn't seem to be any criteria specified to assess the quality of the water. Is there any oversight of this monitoring, which appears to be self-certification? And if PCWL and B do agree to the adoption of the SUDS, what role do they take in the construction phase? That's my first question. My next two bits are to clarify in my own head. Obviously, lots of options on what we vote on here. Is it possible there is a case because of condition 17 that as long as this is take forever, thought, if you like, that we just haven't had enough time to explore more detail, fill the gaps and put in more conditions? So would that qualify to be deferred? Or obviously reject the application? Or if it was to be passed, I understand some extra conditions have been sent from the residents. Could extra conditions be attached to reassure people about the drainage systems, and naturally to come back to committee so that we get to also contribute and see what goes on down the line, which will be critical to the levels? Sorry, it's a bit of a long rant.
Okay. I've forgotten the first one. I've written the other ones down. I missed the first one.
Monitoring the water during construction.
That's right. Okay. Well, I couldn't tell you that exact detail, but there are a series of conditions that I read out earlier as pre-commencement conditions in terms of construction management plans that they need to submit that will need to be approved. So that will pick up exactly what those processes be. Yeah. Yes. The management board will be involved all the way through in terms of agreeing all the details, and by the way, we'll need the assurance throughout that process that the basins that they are building are to the standard that the water level management board will adopt them. So from that point of view, yes, they are involved. I'm not suggesting I don't know if they'll go out on site and look at it actually being constructed, but it will need to be built to the agreed standards that the management board, approved, and we approved through condition 17 for it to be adopted. So they are part of that process, and then they're a key consultee. Deferral, I just don't personally believe there's grounds to defer this. I think it's pretty clear what we're looking at. The reserve matters scheme today, we've seen what the experts have advised, that's the consultees have advised, and we've heard from the developer as well. And I believe the safeguards are in place. And as I said, there's further stages to go through, further appropriate assessments to go through. Conditions, I believe I've added the conditions that need to be on there, and I've obviously looked at the BOAG's conditions. I think the only one that isn't on there is about requiring adoption by the Water Level Management Board, which, as I've explained, I don't believe is reasonable to require. But while I've got the floor, on condition 2B, which is this one says, confirmation that the proposed mitigation measures will be adequate for the lifetime of the development, which is something has been mentioned. So it is there. I think I would suggest clarifying that by saying in accordance with Schedule 6 of the unilateral undertaking, that what requires the development to be maintained in perpetuity through the maintenance and management specification. So it's a clarification to a condition at this stage, remind them and highlight what's required by the unilateral undertaking. While I'm here, there's a couple of small things, just so we're really clear on the conditions, if we do get to a point where you're considering approving this. Condition 8, which requires no dwelling to be occupied until the parking turning areas have been provided, that should say the parking and turning areas for that dwelling have been provided, rather than across the whole site. So we'll build it out on a house by house basis. You'll probably notice the conditions that require the optional building reg standards. So condition 10 relates to a reduced water usage, water efficiency on site. Condition 11 requires all dwellings to be built to part M42, which is accessible and adaptable dwellings, which is sort of lifetime homes equivalent. Just want to highlight in there that there are a couple of maisonettes on the site, and they can't be built to that standard because they're on the upper floor, so they won't have a lift, and you wouldn't expect them to. So I'm just want to suggest that when I said that the dwellings hereby permitted, should say except the maisonettes hereby permitted, so it's clear all the other dwellings.
11.
That was condition 11. And then the developer has confirmed that there will be EV charging points, and I should have imposed a condition to require the details of that. So I'm suggesting a condition 16 that requires details of charging points, which we've heard will be for all dwellings across site, apart from the maisonettes again, I think. So I suggest we add that condition to ensure we get those details.
How can you incorporate the option to the Pevensey board and give them first option? Appreciate that's sort of possibly not conditionable.
I don't think it's not very conditional. I mean, we can have a note to, it's a process is already set in stone, as we've explained, and we've heard the commitments that have been made from both parties. And I think we could have a note that highlights that, and that's the expectation of the local planning authority when it considers those details when submitted. And that's black and white.
Councillor.
Sorry, I know this has gone on, but back to my original question. What has more power, if you like, the unilateral undertaking, the appropriate assessment, or the conditions? Because I think the unilateral agreement says 3 stages of drainage. The appropriate assessment says 5.
Well, putting in 5.
So it's definite.
Anyway.
It's just making sure that and I think that has 5 has been mentioned.
Yeah,
sure that
they are proposing 5. The outline commission didn't require that, but that is what they're proposing. It's shown on the drawings. You can see the series of ponds and swales, and the drainage details will ultimately, under condition 17, will ultimately confirm that as well. The appropriate assessment sits alongside that as a process we have to undertake because of habitat regulation.
I feel assured that there will be 5, but it's just that the legal document says 3. There could be defaulted to, but I am convinced that there will be 5. My other request is that on the penultimate page of the appropriate assessment, you mentioned that if agreement cannot be reached, the SUDs would be offered to either Southern Water or a specialist management company. I understand that Southern Water wouldn't adopt SUDs anyway, but bearing in mind what's happening at the moment and what could happen to Southern Water, which I think has come up in the last day or so, could we have that removed, please? And I don't think there's any reference to Southern Water in the report. Sorry,
Yeah, I'm aware of that. Yeah, thank you. I think that did come from the developers as a suggestion, but yeah, given the conversations we've had and the preferences we have, I don't think we want to be particularly stating any other companies. So that I think I can come out. Yeah.
Right. Are there any other questions or comments? Councillor John Barnes.
Actually, it's more of a comment, I think, than a question, though I'm sure the officers will want to comment back. I genuinely am very worried about this way we are handling appropriate assessments. I'm not at all sure the inspector did not misdirect herself in law, thinking she was a competent authority. I'm not sure that whether she was binding herself or the inspectorate or whom she was binding. I'm even more concerned. I have looked at the judgments in 2017 in some detail, and it seems to me that an appropriate assessment has to be complete and certain. And yet we are deliberately again excluding clause 17 from the discharge of the obligations. And we are saying there will have to be a further appropriate assessment. That is precisely what the European Court, and we are still bound because we're honouring that in our own High Court, that is still actually what was objected to in 2017. Short of an appeal court, I'm not sure who is actually going to ever resolve this issue, but I have to say I have real doubts about the way we are handling appropriate assessments. In many ways, I will make 1 or 2 other comments because I think there are some positive things to be said today, and I think we are dealing with a developer who's made very considerable efforts to, having got their outline planning position, try to accommodate the wishes of the existing residents. If I strike an elegiac note, it's almost inevitable, it seems to me, given the particular character of our planning authority, the development will come to be concentrated in certain areas. And yes, to many of us who knew Little Common, the fact that this is really now West Bexhill rather than Little Common says it all. And yes, the existing residents are bound to feel that their interests are being overridden, and in many ways they are. because we are required to achieve housing targets, and the planning system outside the AONB is weighted in favour of development. That is all a matter of regret, but it's all behind us because that is exactly what the inspector had to deal with. Given the inspector's judgment, whether we like it or not, I think we have made enormous strides to get the type of development which I think is more appropriate to that area. I'm very struck by the width of the streets, by the use of trees. I'd like to see a few more, but no doubt the residents themselves will plant. But there are many things that are attractive about what is going on. So I have no fundamental objection to discharging the conditions. My fundamental objection is actually to approving the AA, because it has to be said that I think we are in breach, certainly of the spirit of what was said in 2017. I think we may be in breach of the actual law as laid down by a court judgment, an authoritative court judgment in 2017. That said, if we are determined to go ahead and approve the appropriate assessment, I will want to see clause 17 strengthened, because it seems to me it needs to address all the gaps, and we do need to achieve the 100% certainty that we are required to deliver as the competent authority. And at the moment it does not. Again, I notice Natural England is beginning to play this curious game of saying, yeah, we approve it, but we don't really approve it unless something happens, and therefore please come back to us. Now that seems to me, again, an outrageous betrayal of their responsibility. But given that, I think we do need to say also that if a statutory authority, and that is what the board is, if a statutory authority doesn't take this on, I think we do need to go back to see if we can satisfy the environmental authorities. I have real fears about management contracts that are intended to last for the best part of a century or more. The statutory authority will have a successor entitlement. I'm not sure who the successor entitled to a maintenance company that goes bankrupt will be. I suspect it will be us. But I would like to urge very strongly that I doubt it's not about discharging conditions per se, but the requirement that we approve an appropriate assessment, which to my mind is incomplete.
Councillor Thomas, you indicated you'd like to speak, yeah?
I would like to propose deferment to the committee.
To do what?
I'd like to propose deferment because, first of all, I think that what Councillor Barnes has said is absolutely right. And it seems to me that we have a choice between a kind of de facto deferment, because if we accept, it seems if we just got to wait upon the fulfillment of goodness knows how many conditions, or on the other hand, a real deferment which this committee decides because it wants to have clear oversight and guarantees that all the conditions are met. So I'm proposing deferment on those grounds. I can speak in more detail, Chair, later if you wish.
So you said based on what Councillor Barnes is saying, is that in relation to the appropriate assessment?
Can I make a brief speech then to explain why I think we should do that? Right? Yeah. So the first thing I think we need to note is that Councillor Barnes is absolutely right, and that we do not have a scientific appropriate assessment. If we think of what science is about uncertainty, and it's about removing that uncertainty by a process of hypothesis, experiment, and above all, measurement. So we want to find out whether the flora and fauna at the present levels will be affected by the contaminants which will undoubtedly come from this one on other housing estates. What we need is some precise measurement. We need to know this level of this contaminant is safe, this level of this contaminant is not safe. And this is how we proceed. We have discovered that lead we thought was safe, was unsafe. Asbestos we thought was safe is unsafe. Diesel fumes we thought were safe are unsafe. And now we have microplastics. That is the other great chemical contaminant in our environment now. And I've given evidence to suggest that it may not be safe for snails. There's a question of how will it be transported to the levels? How much will it build up? How much will it build up within the animals there? What effect will that have? This is true science. And science around this is beginning to emerge, but we're not yet at that point by any means. And so the first thing I would say is the appropriate assessment should be strengthened by dealing with pollutants, because that's a key issue which is totally omitted. The second reason why I think we should go for deferment is because we need to consider the effects of climate change. We've heard this being spoken of, but the fact of the matter is when people talk of a 40% uplift, what have we actually seen? We've actually seen in one month's rain, 3 months' rain, falling in a matter of hours, and not simply in Germany, but in London as well. And the figures on which we've been working were those coming from 2013, and now in 2021, we're going to have a whole new set of figures. So one of my reasons for deferment is to allow the regulations and the advice to catch up with the science, because I'm quite certain that within months, we shall see a change in the allowances to climate change that we've been working on. Another reason, I think, is to give the developer a chance to think very carefully about whether the development that company is proposing to do could be made more sympathetic to the environment. I think that's absolutely key. And so to sum up, what I'm saying is it's all very well for the Pevensey and Cookmere Water Levels Management Board to say that they are satisfied in a way, but they are entitled to be pragmatic. We are the committee of this council, and we have to follow the law. And the law, as Councillor Barnes has said, is perfectly plain. The appropriate assessment must be without gaps. And all we've done today is to say exactly what those gaps are. And so I think it's in the interest of consistency, it's in the interest of transparency, it's in the interest of this committee being able to ensure that the conditions really are met, that instead of going through a de facto deferment, we go through a real deferment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Yes, I found that all very interesting, and I do support, I think, what you're saying. But I do feel that this has been, I feel the design of this development has had little conversation. And it does bother me just a bit that there are elements of the design that we're talking about in perpetuity in terms of a SUD system working. These are homes for people that are sometimes their only home. And I think if they move into something and then find that very soon they need to put extra things into their property to make it compliant with the environment, then really that is extremely difficult for them, and it's an additional cost, and that could be very few years down the line. Having said that, I realise that you are within policy compliance, but there is an element now where we have to code red for humanity isn't just something that we should be ignoring, and I think it's something that we need to think about. Now, in terms of these properties, there are just a couple of questions. Could I, Jeff, possibly ask you to put that plan up? Because I think I haven't been able to look at it, and I really feel sometimes that just keeps reminding me of where things are. I think I mentioned on our site visit, I am a little bit concerned that large vehicles going into the estate actually don't have a really good turning circle to get out again. So we're looking at them reversing all the time to get out. I'm not sure that's comfortable unless I'm misunderstanding the cul-de-sac end bit, but that's something that concerns me. Shall I wait till we sort of have a look at that?
while Jeff's getting it up, I just think it's really important to remember that that we're here to oversee and to apply policy, and it's very frustrating where we see things around us where we're sure are happening, comments on climate change and so forth. But if as an authority there is no firm evidence no real evidence. When I say real evidence, evidence that you can place forward in front of the appropriate authority, whether it's the flood authority or the highways authority, it doesn't matter. Those are very high bars to jump over. They are very, very, very high bars. The word authority is the key word. That is their job. And if anything ends up with an appeal with the inspectorate will defer to the authority. It's as simple as that. It will be very hard for either an applicant or this planning authority to pretend they know more than, say, the highways authority, even if you don't like or disagree with them. We all do in many applications. There are many where we say, I don't like this access. I don't like the access for this personally, but I can't do anything about it because it's been approved by the highways authority and the inspectorate. So there you have it. You have to know what you can change and what you can't change. So I just think it's a real, we've just got to be very, very careful about trying to say that we know better than the authority, because at the end of the day, an inspector will say, no, you don't. It's as simple as that. But please go forward with the question. We have the layout.
Yeah, I'm concerned about that because the safety of larger vehicles. Thank you. Safety of larger vehicles going into that development and moving about within it. Now, and also another concern I haven't noticed, and again, Jeff set me right, are there bin stores? I haven't seen any in the design, which I would be concerned if they weren't there. And is there a possibility of perhaps even a community one that prevents large vehicles going into that area? I mean, these are just design issues that I'm raising that I think might just improve it somewhat.
Yeah. I mean, there are issues that have obviously been considered by the Highways Authority and our waste and recycling team in terms of its suitability for bin collection. I know this is a bit small, but this shows it's got tracking on, tracking for the access, and there's tracking for each of the what I would call the streets that run north-south, and there's a turning head at the end of the main street. So the intention is that the refuse vehicle turns at the end and it reverses and parks at the end of each of these streets, which is where the tarmac ends.
Right, yes.
To collect the bins for those streets. That's an acceptable situation. These are nearly all individual dwellings in their own plots, and they have bin storage and cycle storage as well as part of that. Yeah. So there isn't a collective bin point. I wouldn't have thought we would want that, because the refuse collectors will be able to take the bin from each from the front of each property.
Okay, that's fine. The other just slight concern, and I'm going back to design. If we're sort of creating properties that are self-heating, as it were, and we're working on materials that do that, I am concerned that at least 3 of the designs have bathrooms and cloakrooms that don't have windows, so require ventilation, require lighting. It's just an observation, and I think which means energy. And as I say, my concern is that a new build uses 50 tons of carbon, and I'd like to just think that we are beginning to start thinking about that when we are looking at planning, looking at design, and looking at the future of our community.
Thank you. Councillor
Barnes. I have some sympathy with what Councillor Langlands is trying to do, but I think in planning terms it muddies the waters. I'm afraid that unless we actually put those requirements into our local plan and they are passed by the inspector we cannot impose them on a single developer on a single planning decision.
Correct.
And we really must avoid going down that route. It seems to me we have got to behave very much in accordance with law. My worries are about whether we're behaving in accordance with the law, not about what I think is desirable, but what actually is legal.
I think, unfortunately, that would require a judicial review of the inspectors or an appeal to the High Court. And I think it's actually being considered as to, you know, what if there was any legal challenge to those areas, and that being determined not to be. Councillor Errington.
Can I ask, and I feel that I should know the answer, but I don't, is a deferral non-determination?
I think what you're asking is could the developer appeal the application, and yes, until it's determined, unless there's an extension of time agreed, they can appeal non-determination. So if you deferred it, effectively it remains non-determined. We've got an extension of time at the moment up to next week, which allows obviously any decision taken today to be processed and written up. If you're deferring it, there is that risk.
So an appeal would override the conditions in this report with its own conditions, but the existing conditions from the outline appeal would still stand.
Well, just as you are the local planning authority, the inspector would consider an appeal reserve matters in the context.
So we could we jeopardise what we've got on the table today?
Well, really, yeah, potentially it would come out of your hands.
Yeah.
But I've just really got to urge you that there is no evidence for you to refuse this application.
I have to interject. I really do.
Thank you.
I'm really sensitive to this application, as we have been to the other ones in the area. But you have two things. You know, you have an application which was refused and then accepted at appeal, and then you have the recent application in the Spindlewood, which has got to inform this committee about the attitude of the inspectorate, which does tend to reflect the attitude of the government as well, although it shouldn't do. And what would if you refused it or even deferred it and it went for, it's effectively going for appeal if it's undetermined, that you can make an assessment for yourself as to what you think the possibility of success at appeal is. If you asked me, I think it's under 1%, which is not particularly good. And I don't think I truly do not think, and I don't want to be outspoken about these things, but I truly do not think, whilst I accept Councillor Barnes' point, I think a challenge in law of the kind that you're speaking about is way beyond the remit of this planning committee. If there was a challenge, if we felt that there was a challenge, you know, when the appeal went through, then it would have been raised at that time. And I think the appropriate assessments are very a tricky area, and I think these applications have brought the difficulty of them through. And I do accept also the points that Councillor Thomas makes, you know, with the level of pollutants. I think we're all aware of these issues coming forward. I think they're in our face, but you know, the law and policy tends to lag. That's the issue that we face, and I think it would be a fruitless argument at appeal. You know, quite frankly, I'd love to have the argument. I don't think you're factually incorrect, quite frankly, but that doesn't make it any more successful. And that is the challenge that we face today. And so I would, you know, the advice that I always give is, you know the things that you can change and the things that you can't, and have a plan B. You know, make sure that you can get from this as much as you want to. I'm a little disappointed to hear today some of the comments about why don't we have this in the plan or that in the plan, you know, the layout, because you know we all saw this a year ago with a specific intention of asking the developer to include whatever they could. And if they didn't, there's plenty of opportunity to go back to them and say, you know, we want this or we want that, or we'd like this, could you accommodate it? So I think, you know, they really have tried to work as well as a developer can to accommodate, you know, some things. I mean, electric charging points is a very good point. There is no policy to include those. And they have said that they would include them. And I don't think there's any other application we've seen at all where that has been the case. So it may be a small move forward, but it is a move forward, and it shows good intention, particularly when as an authority we've had to put them through an appeal. Which is pretty tough. I think we've got to have to look at both sides of the story here. Yes, Councillor Thomas.
Can I just make a very, and I promise it will be brief for once, okay, a very brief reply. Namely, the argument around contaminants has never been tested at appeal, never been dealt with by any of the inspectors. It's an extremely important argument, and so far as I'm aware, it hasn't been explored. That's number one. Number two, we are in a different situation so far as climate change is concerned, and that may make a difference to appeal as well.
I think at this point in time we don't have the evidence, so we can't place the argument forward, because if we had it today, it would be firmly on the table. I mean, I would like to have the argument. I would like to. I think it's relevant, but there is no policy or no law or guidance to support it as we stand today, and that's the issue.
Well, there's the IPCC report, there's the meteorological report, and one of the reasons for deferment, as I said, is to allow the advice to catch up with the science.
Councillor Gray.
Sorry, can I just ask a quick question? If we don't defer, can we still get the information that Councillor Thomas has outlined for the impact of the pollution? Because I'm hugely concerned about the pregnancy levels.
The question that I would ask the officer is whether, as appropriate assessments have to be done at each stage here, if there was more information, more substantive evidence, would that be taken into account at that next stage?
Each appropriate assessment is identifying the pathways that could potentially cause harm, and then assessing whether they are properly mitigated. We've already heard today from the consultant that pollutants have already been considered in the design in terms of standing water at the bottom of the basins and their size, and there's a design of the system to allow them to settle. And considering a pollutant remains an issue that considered at future stages of the habitat regs. But we have to do it based on national guidance and advice, and that's what we're testing.
But they're lagging behind.
Well, they are. Do we have any other comments or questions, Councillor Lane?
Can we just clarify then? Have we added some additional conditions? Please, can somebody just clarify with me
there are
exactly what they are?
Well, there are two things. There is a proposal to defer, which at this point has not been seconded. And then there is a number of proposed conditions, which I'll read out the ones I think I've got here, and you can tell me if I've missed any. One is to add the plot 60 to 70 to a condition regarding surface water drainage. Yeah, correct. The next one is to modify 2B, which is to include. You want to read that out?
Add to condition 2B, which relates to confirmation of the proposed mitigation measures will be adequate for the lifetime of the development. It's to highlight that is in accordance with Schedule 6 of the unilateral undertaking. They're minor typos really, but condition 8 is about the parking and turning areas, and just clarifying that they have to be provided prior to the occupation of each dwelling. That the Part M42 optional building reg standard applies to the houses, and an additional condition 16 which requires detail of electric vehicle charging,
and also 11, which is to place except masonettes in there.
Oh, that was that's.
So they're the proposed extra conditions. Should somebody put a motion forward for approval of the application. So we have a proposal for deferment. Do we have a second of deferment? If there is, then we would take a vote on that, and then we would move forward.
Question, Chair.
You can.
If someone is to second this, then we take a vote. If someone else nominates whether to reject or nominates whether to accept reserved matters, and someone else seconds it, we take that vote. So in theory, we could take 3 votes. Are you with me? To see which way everyone
you're voting. Well, can you?
First motion. If the first motion fails, you go to the second motion. Say, for argument's sake, that was for approval. And that fails. Third motion would be for refusal. That fails. And we do have a point in the Constitution where we can refer up to full council.
Oh, God, don't do
I thought we've been there before, haven't
that.
we?
Please don't do that. Councillor Gray. Councillor Gray, I
I
think
was going to second the.
you've got a second.
motion to
So we have a motion to defer, and that we have a second to defer. So we will take a vote. So there is a proposal to defer. Those in favour of deferring this, they like to raise their hands. Okay. Those against deferral, would you like to raise your hands? Okay. So you've got another one. You've got three. Do we have any abstentions on that? No. Okay. So that motion has failed. Would anyone else like to put up a motion? Yes. Sorry. Sorry. You would like to move approval. Councillor Gandy would like to move approval. Would anyone like to second that? Have a second. Sorry, and I'll just ask Councillor Errington to.
I would second it on the basis that we have these conditions. Yeah.
Are you happy to accept those conditions,
Yeah.
Councillor Stevens, because she's officially seconded it?
And it comes back to committee.
Yeah, and it comes back to
That
committee.
it comes back.
But we've got too many microphones on. Hang on, we've got too many microphones on for a moment. Let me just take these one at a time. We have a motion to approve. It's been seconded. Councillor Stevens has seconded it with the addition of the conditions which have already been outlined and the addition of the condition that
Bring it back to committee.
it comes back to committee for the approval of appropriate assessment. And do you want to comment on that? And I'll come back to you in a second.
As recommended, condition 2 on the recommendation, if this is approved, does strengthen condition 17 because it highlights, that clarifies the issues that we talked about really today that come out of reserved matters that need to be satisfied via condition 17. So that is there. We can't have a condition that requires it to come back to committee because a condition is something that the applicant can reassure. We can have a note on it, and of course it can be noted and minuted that this committee wants that condition and the appropriate assessment draft that sits alongside it to come back to.
Okay, so it can't be a condition. It's a note. And Councillor Barnes, you had a final point.
Yes, the reason why I think we need to, it might be strengthened, but I think it's partly for the benefit of the applicant. So I think he needs to know what he has to satisfy in order to meet condition 17. So I suppose what I'm talking about is specificity rather than necessarily strength. But it does seem to me that at the moment there are gaps in it which ought to be filled. Very happy to leave that to the officers as to how that is done. But I think that should be, the motion should be approved on that basis.
Yeah, they're in condition 2 on page 25. And on those, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 specific issues, which are the ones that the legal local flood authority have specifically identified. So that is there.
And a further note regarding the. Okay, good. All right, and one further note regarding the applicant's agreement to give the management board the first option.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have that proposal to approve in front of us. We have a vote, please. Those who would vote in favour of approval, would you raise your hands, please? And those against? 2, and those abstaining? Have we captured everyone there? I think that's passed. So thank you very much. Very long discussion with a lot of complexity. This was a very complex issue. And I think on that note, we'll have a 10-minute break till midday if everyone's happy to do that. We'll stop our live streaming for 10 minutes. Thank you. And we are now continuing with the Planning Committee meeting of the 12th of August. And the application that we are now going to be looking at is application
RR 2021/1608/P, which is the former Ashwood Nursing Home in Heathfield. And I'm going to pass over to the officer, Matt Worsley.
Right. Good morning, everybody. There are two separate reports on the agenda relating to the former Ashwood Nursing Home site. First is a new planning application, which is effectively a resubmission of the application appealed against the non-determination. Do you need me to repeat that? Or?
Yes.
I'll start again. Right. There are two separate reports on the agenda relating to the former Ashwood Nursing Home site. The first is a new planning application, which is effectively a resubmission of the application appealed against the non-determination, which came before you at the May 2021 Planning Committee. The second report relates to the application that was appealed against for non-determination, which you resolved not to defend at the May meeting. However, as part of the resubmission application, new issues have arisen from consultees, and therefore 2020 application is being reported to members again so that instruction can be given on how they wish the appeal to be dealt with. The proposal relates to a site on the edge of Burwash Common at the junction between Heathfield Road and Swingate Hill. It is located outside of a recognised development boundary and is within the High Weald AOMB. The former nursing home has been vacant since 2015 and is considered a brownfield site. Within the reports, it is explained that there are open undeveloped fields on the opposite side of the road to the south. For clarification, whilst there is a field opposite, there are properties, so residential properties further south on Vicarage Lane, and the main part of the village to Burwash Weald is to the east of the field. So just to give it a bit of context. The applicant sought pre-application advice from the local planning authority on a 14 dwelling scheme and has consulted widely with the local community, which has resulted in a reduction in the number of dwellings proposed, together with other design changes. Permission is sought to change the use of the site from a nursing home to residential. This would involve demolishing the existing buildings at the southern end of the site. And if you see the black and white plan to the right-hand side, the grey outline is the existing building. I think it shows a previously approved extension at the back, but the building along the southern edge is the outline of the existing, along with some of it at the rear. And the other dark grey bit to the north is where we previously granted a new access and parking area, but that hasn't been carried out. So that's just, undeveloped land at the moment, that northern part. So a total of 12 residential units will be built. This will include a block of 4 flats on the southwest corner of the site, terrace of 3 two-storey dwellings with dormers in the roof, the east of the block of flats. The main parking court would be in the middle of the development, and to the north of the parking court you've got a detached 2-storey dwelling facing onto Swingate Hill, and a pair of detached 2-storey semis with dormers in the roof behind that detached property. On the northern part of the site is where the 2 self-build units are proposed to be served by a separate new access. Yeah. Talk through the elevation plans. So the plan on the screen shows top street view seen is from Swingate Hill. And it shows the existing development, so nursing home building, with dark area showing the proposed extensions that haven't been built. The plan below shows the proposed street view elevation. So to the right hand side, you've got the properties facing the A265. You've got the detached property in the middle facing onto Swingate Hill. 2 semi-detached buildings, dwellings would be behind that. And then further down, between that 2-storey dwelling and the pavilion, we've got the 2 self-build units. So from the front elevation, they are single-storey, got a mono-pitched roof, sloping upwards towards the rear. See on the elevation plans. Yeah, so the self-build unit, lot 1. See on the side elevations how single story at the front, then increases in height to the rear. So plot 3 is the detached 2-storey property facing onto Swingate Hill. A pair of semi-detached dwellings behind, dormers would face onto the parking court. The terrace of 3 faces onto the A265. Then that's the block of 4 flats. The proposed development offers many benefits, including the reuse of a brownfield site, together with the economic and social benefits associated with the provision of 12 additional dwellings. However, whilst the dwellings would make a useful contribution to the housing stock in the district, they would not count towards the residual housing needs of the village of Burwash, given that the core strategy sets out that there is no residual housing requirement in Burwash Common. Despite the benefits outlined, the proposal would result in the lost nursing home, which is a community facility. In respect of the test set out within policies C01 and DC01 of the DASA, alternative provision of the community facility is not proposed. It therefore needs to be demonstrated that there is no reasonable prospect of retention of current use and that no other community use of the site is suitable or viable. The site was first marketed for continued nursing home use, other community uses, as well as other development opportunities in February 2018, where offers in excess of £1 million were sought. February 2019, the price of the site was reduced to offers in excess of £750,000, and up to August 2019, there have been a total of 32 inquiries, with only 5 of them being for a continued C2 use. In August 2019, an unconditional offer was accepted, with the sale completed in December 2019. In terms of viability, a report accompanying the application provides figures for refurbishment of the care home in its current form to create a standards compliant facility
providing 19 rooms, or alternatively the redevelopment of the care home create a 44-bedroom unit facility, which had previously received planning approval in 2005, although the permission was not implemented, and that's what you saw. Well, you can see on the bottom plan here, the extension was previously. As required by paragraph 3.8 of the DASA, during the first application, permission was sought from the planning agent to obtain independent verification of the viability evidence submitted, be undertaken at the applicant's expense. However, this was not agreed, and therefore independent verification has not taken place. Having the viability report independently verified would have allowed the local planning authority to fairly assess the submitted financial details on the 2 nursing home redevelopment schemes and alternative community uses, make a judgment over the compliance with the relevant policies. In the absence of independent verification of the viability information, it has not been satisfactorily demonstrated that the nursing home or alternative commercial or community facilities are not capable of being financially viable, contrary to policies CO1 and DCO1 of the DASA. There are also design issues with the proposal which are considered to cause harm to the AONB. These can be summarised as follows. 2 self-build units would occupy plots disproportionate in size to their footprint and would appear cramped and out of character with the more spacious plots within the locality. Parking court would include large expanses of hard standing with leftover and ambiguous space, which includes a lack of definition to plots 3, 4 and 5, close bordered fencing to the rear of plots 6, 7 and 8. All of which would result in a very suburban development out of keeping with the prevailing pattern and character of development in the AONB. Large dormers are proposed on dwellings, which would result in a top-heavy appearance, and the concerns over the roof design of the apartment block with a steeper pitch required. In terms of the living conditions of future occupiers of some of the dwellings, the concerns include the private rear garden of Block 2 self-build unit being overshadowed by large trees, the rear boundary, which would severely constrain its usability and would offer a poor level of amenity to future occupiers. The footpath immediately to the north of Flat 2 would result in other residents being able to walk past the window and have direct views into the bedroom, which would create privacy issues. The close proximity to self-built units with the facing elevations containing the only windows to a bedroom in each unit, which would result in a poor level of outlook to occupiers. The issue of drainage was highlighted and explained to be unresolved in the application appealed against for non-determination. With the current application, the lead local flood authority has maintained its objection and advised that infiltration testing needs to be provided up front. They state that the information cannot be conditioned as it is not clear whether surface water runoff can be managed without increasing flood risk elsewhere. However, since the committee report was written, we have received comments from Southern Water, which was circulated in the update, who now raise no objection to the scheme. They advise that the surface water flows from the proposed development would be reduced from the existing flows to the public sewer. So therefore, if drainage can't be provided by infiltration, public sewer would be a viable alternative. Therefore, the originally proposed reason for refusal relating to drainage has been removed, and we can secure the, if minded to approve
required condition. A new issue that has arisen is that environmental health has advised that the need for an air quality assessment is triggered in accordance with the Sussex Air Quality Guidance. However, as the site is neither in or near to an air quality management area and is small in scale and nature, a full air quality assessment is not necessary. Instead, an emissions mitigation assessment is required. This was requested from the agent and applicant during the application, but due to time constraints, the information could not be provided. Bearing in mind the relatively small increase in traffic that the development would generate, members are minded to grant permission. Consideration may be given to imposing conditions relating to air quality mitigation. There has been concern expressed by locals over parking provision. However, the Highway Authority has raised no objection. County Council parking calculator indicates that the proposal would provide an adequate number of parking spaces. Secure cycle storage would also be provided on the site, offering occupiers an alternative, sustainable method of travel. In conclusion, the proposal results in the unjustified loss of a community facility. The design issues and the consequent harm to the AONB are also considered to provide a clear reason to refuse development. On top of this, there are concerns relating to the living conditions of future occupiers of some of the proposed units. Affordable housing is not being secured, and air quality issues not being assessed. For the reasons outlined, the recommendation is to refuse planning permission for the resubmitted scheme. It is also recommended to defend the appeal against non-determination on the grounds that the planning application would have been refused and the appeal should be dismissed. Just in relation to that non-determination appeal, that was the one that you considered at the May meeting. The only real change has been the air quality issue introduced. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have two speakers for the application. The first is Helen Greenhouse. Helen, if you come forward to the table there and you push the button, the light comes on and you have 5 minutes, and there could be some questions after.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Members will recall being disappointed with officers' approach to the last application when so much local support had been gained for the proposals, including from the parish and the Save Our Fields group. After the decision members made in May not to defend the appeal on the grounds that the scheme would have been approved, our client took the opportunity to submit a duplicate application, which we hope would be decided quickly and positively so that the appeal could be withdrawn, thereby saving both parties time and expense. We were pleasantly surprised when the second application was validated quickly, however latterly astonished at the decision of officers to ignore the May resolution and not only recommend the second application refusal for the same reasons suggested before, but also to add two further reasons for refusal, re-drainage and air quality, which could easily be dealt with by conditions. We also consider the officer's approach in trying to reopen matters on the first application, which has already been determined clearly minuted, because of the second submission of the second application to be entirely unreasonable. I note the drainage reason has now been dropped, but we do still query the appropriateness of the air quality reason for refusal. When this was not previously raised, the site's not in an air quality management area, the site is small in scale, and the EHOs acknowledge there would only be very modest increase in traffic movements, which is likely to have a negligible impact compared to the nursing home. If members are minded to approve and consider it absolutely necessary, our client would be willing to accept a condition, but we don't consider there's much justification for it. We'd also query the justification for a noise assessment to be submitted by a condition, bearing in mind this wasn't raised before. The development is surrounded by residential properties, and the development would need to adhere to building regulations in relation to noise attenuation in any event. The site presents an excellent opportunity to deliver much needed housing, and the planning benefits of the proposal are substantial. Although falling just outside the settlement boundary, as members know, at present the Council's housing supply and delivery issues mean the locational policies for housing are currently deemed out of date, and the weight ascribed to them is therefore reduced. The application would therefore fall to be assessed against the presumption in favour test in the MPPF. This previously developed site is very much part of the urban fabric of Burwash Common Village, with bus stops outside and other facilities in walking distance. It would deliver much needed housing of various sizes, including self-builds, affordable housing and smaller dwellings to meet local needs. During the scheme's evolution, we were mindful of the AONB status and the landscape sensitivities, putting the majority of the development at the southern end of the site, which already contains imposing buildings. Sites well screened with mature vegetation, and proposals seek to enhance it further on all boundaries. The conclusion of the landscape visual assessment was that it would not materially harm the OMB. The design and layout has also followed the High Wheel Design Guide and has been modified following feedback and discussion with local amenity groups. Proposals have also been carefully designed to limit over neighbouring amenity issues. As evidenced by the marketing and viability reports, there will be no harm arising from losing the vacant nursing home facility. In these circumstances, the planning balance weighs heavily in support of the proposal, a view that was previously confirmed by the Planning Committee in May. In the absence of any significant material change in circumstance since the May resolution, both on the ground and in terms of planning policy, and in the interest of fairness, we consider it would only be reasonable and just for members to support this application. As you know, the applicant is a local developer who has always been committed and open with local people and worked tirelessly with stakeholders to devise a scheme which has support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Any questions? No, I think you're very clear in what you're saying. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think we have another, Nick Collins Green, who's from Artemis and is also going to speak in favour of the application. Please come forward. You could just press the button to. Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I believe that we have now proven beyond most people's doubt that our application and scheme is policy compliant, both nationally and locally. And we feel that the officers' concerns are unfounded. All of the arguments, all of the points have been said many times before, and they should, in our view, be more than enough this application to be approved and to go forward. But I believe there's another compelling reason why this application should go forward, and that is because it is what local people want. I'm local. I lived in Spring Lane for 9 years. I have a family that still farm at Park Farm next to Bateman's. And because of that, I was very, very keen to listen carefully to what local people had to say about this site. I attended numerous meetings with residents associations, Save Our Fields, the parish council. What came across from those meetings, and even people walking past in the street, was that they want to get rid of that ugly building, and what they want is for sympathetically designed housing to replace it. Local people understand the need for new housing, but they want that housing ideally to be provided on brownfield, pre-developed sites, rather than greenfield sites being forced upon them. So that to me is really important too. Another really important aspect of this application and our approach is in the provision of affordable housing. And that again came across very strongly in talking to local people. What they don't want is for developers to pay off-site contributions
and then the community don't see the benefit. They want affordable to be genuinely affordable, small scale in their communities for community benefit. And that's why I've always been strong on this point that I want to provide our obligation on site. And we now have a provider who is working with us to provide 2 units, and they specialize in small scale schemes like ours, provide the affordable that the bigger housing associations are not particularly interested in. We appreciate the difficulties that the planning department have had, particularly over the last 18 months. And, you know, it's been a difficult time for everybody, but I believe that we have had for a long time a good scheme, and we feel that the officers should have been able to put this forward proposal for approval. But it's obviously now up to you. Thank you for your time in considering these matters.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Mr. Collins Green? Councillor Barnes.
I don't want to take you through all the numerous consultations, but I think it might be worth bringing out that originally the scheme was fronting on Springate Hill, and when objections were raised to that possibly overlooking the properties on the other side, you swung the whole balance of development round to face the main road. Is that correct?
We've had a number of design changes in consultation with local people, and in particular Save Our Fields and the Parish Council. Our first idea of converting the existing building to flats was pretty soon given a resounding no thank you. So yes, Councillor Fines, you're correct. We did originally have the orientation different to what we have now. But one of the issues that kept coming back was that people wanted to see a more traditional streetscape, and they wanted, they were very keen for the terrace onto the A road, and they actually wanted something on Swingate Hill, which is why we've arranged it as it is, with one house, which doesn't have a huge mass and it's not overbearing. And then going back into the site, we've got the 2 semi-detached.
Thank you. I have a question for you. The 2 houses at the lower end of the block, I'm struggling to see how they, and you have shown them, even though they're self-built, you have shown a design. So I presume that is the design you're proposing, is that right?
Sorry, could you repeat that? I'm a bit hard of hearing.
Oh, that's all right. The 2 houses at the bottom of the block, the 2 self-built houses, you're showing the design of those houses. Are they the design that you are proposing to go with?
They are.
They are, because they are self-built. I'm struggling to see how those houses conform to the High Wheel Design Guide.
It was interesting that the High Wheel unit, when they reported back, they actually made no comment on the design, the contemporary design. And also interestingly, we've had very, very little comments, negative comments about the design of the self-builds, and some quite positive comments too.
Any other questions? No. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. I think the earlier application will run out. So let's move along. We'll start with Councillor Barnes, who's the ward member. I know Councillor Kirby Green would have liked to have been here, but couldn't.
Yes, Eleanor is prevented by another engagement from coming today, so it forced me to do the slightly awkward thing, which is first of all to express the views of the locality, and then reserve my own views for slightly later in the debate. I think it's fair to say that the nearer you are to this site, the more you are likely to object. But there hasn't really been an enormous amount of objection to the principle of redevelopment on a brownfield site. That has almost universally been welcomed. The major cause of objection in Burwash Common, and this is in Burwash Common rather than Burwash Weald, though if you live there, you would find it very difficult to decide which one you were in. The major cause has been parking on the roads. And I think the general feeling was they would have liked to see more parking on the site. But that, of course, is not, as I explained last night again at the Parish Council, within our gift. That is very much for county, and county have raised absolutely no objection. So I don't think that is really anything that we can address ourselves. The problem is some of the parking from Boundary Close, which is a development we approved in 2007 with rather limited parking, tends to spill over onto Vicarage Road. And there is fear that anybody who can't find parking on this site will go and park in Vicarage Road. So that's been a principal issue. Question of the site being overdeveloped was raised, and the applicant met that by reducing the number of houses by 2. There has been no objection at all to the monopitch houses on the south of the site, other than the remark by some members of the Playing Field Committee that the pavilion might, and they say might, be affected. When you actually look, I think, at the elevations in that area, the pavilion will blot out pretty well any view of the site whatsoever. The pavilion is rather a handsome building, I have to say. There has been an enormous amount of worry on Swingate Hill itself about being overlooked, and as I brought out by my question, that has been met by the reorientation of the site. There are 2 powerful voices broadly favouring this development. One is the Parish Council. They too, I think, would have preferred to see slightly fewer houses, but on balance, they feel that the development should go ahead. Obviously, questions of viability may determine the number. What they are passionately anxious to see is 2 affordables, and it is good news if, as the applicant seems to have confirmed today, we now have a provider, because the problem was never the applicant was unwilling to provide the affordables. It was our officers who were dubious whether a provider would take them on, a social provider. The other issue, the other group that is predominantly concerned is Save Our Fields, which is a passionate amenity group dedicated to preserving the AONB. And again, you will see from their comments that although, again, they think there is slight overdevelopment going on the site, they feel that on balance, again, this is desirable to see it developed. I think that expresses local opinion. I think if ideally they would have 1 fewer house and slightly more parking, but they don't really feel that this is an insuperable rejection to what's going on. There is an awful lot of recognition that the developer has worked with locals on the design in particular. And again, I think if we, the officer concerned has suggested, I think 1 gable end being modified and 2 of the parking sides being slightly modified. I'm sure if we wanted to attach that as a rider to any motion that we move, the applicant would do his best to meet those needs. I have to say throughout, I have found Mr. Collins-Grieve extremely amenable to local opinion, and because he lives in the area, people can get him in a way that they can't usually get at developers. But he does listen. I think that reserves, Byron, do you want me to say something about my own views?
You might as well say it now, John.
At risk of boring you, Steve, there are two or three things which I think probably. Can I first of all say a word of thanks to the planning officer concerned for an extremely thorough report. If I'm going to differ from him, and I probably will, I do recognise that this is one of the most balanced and thorough reviews of the issues, and I do thank him for that. He has also corrected in his presentation something which I thought might be misleading to you, which is the land to the south. We are in a rather odd situation in Burwash Common and Weald, in that the development is ragged. It's not the kind of solid built-up area that you get in a town like Bexhill. And to the south of this site, when you go across what appears to be an open field, which in fact belongs to the bungalow at the end of Vicarage Road, you come to a row of houses called the Martlets, which goes off Vicarage Lane, and then there are further properties on Vicarage Lane beyond. In other words, it's a typical high-wheel development where you do get a degree of scatter, and it's very hard to draw an adequate development boundary. We found that in the past. I don't want to refer to the unhappy history of boundary close, but I have to say we gave permission for that in 2007 with far less objection from our officers. And it is actually, both in terms of design, parking and location, I think a lot worse than on this brownfield side. Burwash Common and Weald have a pub, a church, there is a cafe shop, there are two garden centres, one outside the village, one in. There are other firms, garden design and things like that in the locality. It is not your typical hamlet. It has something like 626 voting adults living in the area. So you're dealing really with a small village rather than a hamlet. And this, of course, is a brownfield site, which I think gives additional credence why we should permit some development here. The existing building was extremely ugly at one end and quite handsome at the other end. What the developer has tried to do is to catch something of the Edwardian characteristic of the best end of that development and catch the flavour of the street scene. And I think myself that he has been successful. I share some of the locals' concerns about parking, but I have to say I don't think it is for this developer to try and meet those concerns so long as he actually conforms to policy, which he does. I have some doubts about the size of the monopitch house on plot 2, but although I would probably have some issues still with what is proposed, I think the overall balance of advantage is clearly to get this eyesore removed, to get this brownfield site developed, and to get houses built which locals passionately need and want. And therefore I will be supporting this and will be happy to support any resolution to accept this.
Any other comments, questions? comments? Does anyone want to move a motion? Yeah, your merit, Councillor Barnes. Well, I don't think I'm going to comment on that. Councillor Mary Barnes is moving what? Approval. Is anyone seconding that? Councillor Carmer. Yes, yes, Councillor Tracy.
Yes, I just, because the recommendation, I just want some clarity over that motion, because the recommendation is that it be resolved to refuse. So should the motion not be based on that recommendation that we?
No, anyone can move any. You don't have to test the. You don't have to test. I don't believe you have to test the recommendation that's put forward. Somebody puts a different recommendation forward. Councillor Ganley. Yes, you can.
I understood you to say that this application is pretty well the same as the application that was refused previously. Am I correct?
It wasn't refused.
Wasn't refused.
It was undetermined.
Well, undetermined. Sorry, it was undetermined. I thought it had been refused.
No, it was undetermined, and we agreed not to
defend
it.
Okay, my mistake. Thank you.
Councillor Langlands. Everyone's asking questions now.
Yes, just a quick question about the footpath.
Come on, that's fine.
Thank you. Is there some way that could be changed so that it doesn't actually walk in front of, the flats and the downstairs bedrooms and so on? Is there some way there could be some slight condition to change that before we approve?
Well, I mean, that is design. Yeah, I mean, that is to do with the internal parking and footpath design, and which was included in that recommended reason for refusal.
Yeah,
I mean, the resubmission has come in with that footpath details still. If maybe a question for the applicant, I don't know.
You can't condition a change to the design, that you're trying to make a decision on the design that's presented.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Tracy. We need to turn them on.
I think I would have real questions about how many people will actually be walking past.
I think Councillor Drayson was speaking. Sorry, Councillor Barnes.
It was just, I'm trying to get my head around because we've had this before, that if the resolution is to refuse it, there are no conditions. The officer has quite correctly put in no conditions because he thinks we shouldn't accept it.
Yeah. So
if we now approve it,
you delegate.
We're now trying. Yeah, but how? Because now people are coming up with possible conditions.
Okay, so
it's that procedure. I'm not quite sure.
If it's approved, it would be approved with officers delegated to develop the conditions. Yeah, and correct.
Yes, although it would be if we get to that stage, it would be good to have a conversation about what conditions members may want. It would be a requirement from Section 106 as well to secure the affordable housing. So, before we finish. I mean, do you want me to do that now?
I think we're at that stage now, aren't we?
Sorry, Tim, did you?
Sorry, we haven't had a second about the approval yet, have we?
Yes, we not.
No.
I thought you approved. You seconded it. Councillor Harmer did.
You have.
Yeah. All right. Well, you can have a discussion about conditions. Are there any other? And does anyone want to have any other questions or comments, or are we just going to have a discussion about conditions? Have a discussion about conditions.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So in the event
in the event of approval.
The decision will have to be delegated for a Section 106 planning obligation to secure the affordable housing. Really positive that it sounds like the provider is interested in 2 units on site. Legal agreement for that. In terms of conditions, there would be standard ones relating to time limits, and approved plans. We want to see additional details or samples of materials. Fairly standard practice on majors to require architectural detailing of properties. Again, standard practice to secure hard and soft landscaping. County archaeologist has requested a pre-commencement condition for investigations. As mentioned in the presentation and raised by the agent or applicant, environmental health have requested a noise survey is carried out. They did want that up front before the application is determined, but are willing to have that as a condition. But you heard the applicant explain they thought that was unreasonable, so it'd be with you to decide whether that's going to be a requirement. And really the issue is traffic on the A265 and the proximity of the proposed dwellings. You know, how much noise is there at the moment? We don't know. And yeah, what could be done to mitigate that? So that would be the purpose of the condition. Again, environmental health have requested condition related to contaminated land. Instead of it being pre-commencement, we did Aquarius, and that can impact the in the event that contamination is found during development, then it can be reported to us and addressed. So yeah, sort of less strict condition related to contaminated land. They've also asked for relating to construction management plan and hours of delivery during construction. That'd be weekdays between certain hours and probably Saturday mornings. The Highway Authority have recommended, I think, possibly 8 conditions to do with access improvement, visibility, parking, turning. They have asked for a travel plan. In the non-determination appeal, they asked something about upgrading bus stops nearby, which seemed, well, it was over the top for this scale of development, but this time they have asked for a travel plan, which you may consider ties in with the air pollution issue or air quality issue. Again, electric charge points also count the air quality issue. Mitigation calls that. There are trees on the site, and the application is accompanied by a survey that details tree protection measures. So we want that. Drainage, as mentioned earlier, with the details of that. Ecology report recommends enhancement measures. And then there's the standard conditions relating to water efficiency, accessible and adaptable dwellings, and securing the self-built well. So what's 1 and 2 would be self-built. That is it.
Yes, Councillor Langlands.
Do you have a condition for the management of the self-build? So the traffic in relation to building those coming and going with traffic to the other part of the development? I mean, is that something you put in as a condition?
Well, I understand that the developer will be doing this in phases. So the 2 self-build units will first phase. So it will be traffic related to that, and then the middle section. So 3 more. Then yeah, there will be 3 stages. So it'll be staggered.
Councillor Maley.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can I just have clarification that the 2 on-site affordable homes are in place of the S106? That there's some guarantee that they would remain. They're not likely to change, to suddenly become, 2 plots that somebody can build. I appreciate you saying that which I didn't really appreciate before, that they would be the first to be built.
No, so sorry, probably should clarify that. So the two self-build units, the very modern design with the modern mono-pitched roof, they're self-build units separate to affordable housing. So in addition to the self-build, you have two on-site affordable houses, which would be managed by
So just as a follow-on from that, if I may, Chairman, are we going to secure S106 money?
So the 106, we've proposed some wording, so it'd be two on-site units and a 20% contribution. In the event there's an issue with by taking the two units on, it would be 2.2, well, a commuted sum equivalent to 2.2 affordable units. So there would be a bit of flexibility there. But the applicant has explained that they have found a provider that's interested, so positive.
Okay. Could change.
Well, they'd have to apply to vary the section 106 like any other developer would, if there's if they don't want to provide affordable.
Yeah, Councillor Barnes.
Just through you, Chairman. This is one of the oddest situations I've ever come across. It's our officers who've been making the case for having a sum because the developer actually wants to put the two affordables on the house. And the issue why our officers are raising, perfectly reasonable, these two units is very small for a social provider to take on. But so long as the social provider is willing to take them on, the developer has no intention of withdrawing and providing money instead. He wants to build affordable houses for the locals.
To be fair, John, the developer actually argued against the full quantity of affordable houses that would normally be because of the previous use of the site. So normally it would attract 4 to 5. Are there any other questions?
Can I just ask a point of clarification from Councillor Mary Barnes? In proposing the approval, can you give reasons for the minutes as to why you want to approve as opposed to go with refusal? You need to give reasons why you are proposing to overturn the recommendation for approval for the purposes of the minutes.
I am of opinion that a recent home, I think
Brownfield site. On balance, brownfield, the use of the brownfield site outweighs the loss of the community use, which is unlikely to occur. Right, okay, well, let's take a vote. We have a proposer and a seconder. Sorry, Julie. Dream there. Keep going. Those in favour of this proposal, raise their hands. I think it's everyone. Okay, and that is with the conditions proposed by the officer. Any against? One against? Do we have any abstaining? No? Good. Good, okay, let's move right along, which is to the last one, which is a minor application. Sorry? Oh God, we have to do that too, don't we? Yes, so we do. So, yeah, so there is the second application, which was the same site, and that is RR2021798P, yeah, and this is to resolve to defend against the appeal for non-determination. So does anyone want to put a proposal on that? Okay, so propose. Would you like to propose?
To be withdrawn.
You still have to. We still have to deal with the item.
Therefore, that we probably don't need to defend it.
Okay, your proposal is not to defend. So do I have a seconder for that? We have a second, Councillor Madeley. Could we take a vote on that? Those in favour of non-defence of that application? I think that is unanimous. Just to check there's nobody against, no abstentions. Good, okay. Well, it'd be a bit silly as they just got approval for the site. I think I'd be worried.
It would be a bit silly. Well, what would happen?
Well, we wouldn't defend it.
Okay.
And then they'd get the same approval they just got 5 minutes ago. I think is the answer. So we're going to move very swiftly on to the application, which is 2021/381P, which is an applicant by a member, which is why it's come to committee. And so we'll take that. And there is, we do have Councillor Coleman, who has sat patiently to say a few words on this.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, this is an application by a councillor, hence it's before you. 37 Infield Road, a proposal for a third floor extension to 2 flats. We visited this on Tuesday. Don't intend to say a lot more about the report, but just to remind you, this is the site on Infield Road. So you've got existing elevations on. Well, no, sorry. They all exist. They remain existing at ground first and second floor, and there's a proposed new third floor, which is the bottom right image there. So you can see that it adds additional floor on top, together with an addition to the stairwell, which is a separate building. You can also see that in elevation. So on the left, you've got the existing, and on the right, you've got the proposed, which has that additional mansard floor. You can't see very clearly on here, but it would have the pitched elements of that would be tile faced, and the brick elements would be a darker brick, so they would read distinctly as a roof profile above the existing building. You can see the stair tower has to be raised up as well at that level. And the recommendation is to approve the application.
All right, and I think we have Councillor Coleman just to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I thought I'd take the opportunity to speak as a local member in support of this application, and I'm pleased to see that officers are recommending approval. Committee members may recall a similar application to this above what used to be Earl's Bakery. The recommendation then was for refusal, but this committee, of which I was gladly a member of at the time, decided rightly that the benefits of the third floor outweighed any incongruity with neighbouring properties. In actual fact, would be a potential catalyst to enable others in Sidley High Street to do similar. That application was a resounding success. And I hope that committee members got a chance to look over the Earls site during the Planet visit on Tuesday to see how nice it looks. The construction of that third floor has aided the council's housing and homelessness strategy, has enabled 2 great local businesses to set up shop below. And in fact, we now have, as per 8.3.5 in the report, a whole plethora of properties with permission along Sidley High Street for similar upwards development. And now we have this application a little further along to do much the same thing, creating much needed properties in the area and enabling financial security and sustainability for the shop fronts below. And I really think that word sustainability is important here, not least because when you look at the planning system in the simplest of terms, the whole purpose is to achieve sustainable development. And this is sustainable development. And so I ask members to support the sustainability of Sidley High Street and vote with the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Move approval.
Chairman, I just wanted to register, and this is probably the only opportunity I have, whereas I understand why an inspector on Spindlewood might differ from us, I have singular concerns about him awarding costs. I cannot believe that with habitats regulations and with the penalty levels, that we were at all irresponsible in that decision. And it seems to me, I don't know what we can do about making representations to the inspectorate, but I feel we should, because I really feel the inspector underrated the importance of the penalty levels.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we have passed that decision to our lawyers, so the legal department of the shared service, and to the barrister who appeared for us, and I haven't had any comments back yet, but I certainly haven't heard any comments from them suggesting what you just said there. And I think what the inspector said was highlighted was there had to be reasonable scientific doubt. So therefore, we had to have evidence back up that hunch. It can't just be a hunch. It can't be a feeling. We've got to have our own scientific evidence to back up the difference of opinion compared with the statutory consultees, and we didn't have that. And I think that is why he awarded costs.
It's also worth pointing out that we were told by PINS that we had to have a public inquiry because they considered the content important enough to have a public inquiry. So that, if you like, was enforced upon rather. So for them to afford full costs is, I think it does need to be questioned when it comes back and appealed. Thanks.
Yeah, I understand that. Point. I think what the inspector would say is that it's their responsibility to ensure the right format is followed. That was their choice. I'm sure it was partly to the fact that there was a large objector group as well that often raises the level of format in terms of ensuring that they have the right to put their case forward, and they did have the ability to be a Rule 6 party and appear, properly with a barrister, but formally with a barrister, which I think was the expectation probably of the inspectorate, but Spindle chose not to do that, which is fine and was their right. But that's perhaps why that route was chosen. But yeah, it's obviously it is normal practice and will be our procedure with our lawyers to scrutinise very carefully the costs that are put to us in terms of the cost of the appellant, and to ensure that they are totally justified and to negotiate probably a lower amount, but that will depend on obviously what is put to us by the appellant.